Welcome you to the Harbor Live Workshop. This has been a long time coming, but I am so excited that the day is finally here. Now, in case you didn't see where we are right now, I'm coming at you from a little town called Cabbagetown, which is sort of a little neighborhood basically near downtown Atlanta. I live in an old cotton mill that was turned into lofts many years ago, so that's what you see behind you. I'm a big collector of antiques, so a lot of the stuff you see behind you is part of that antique collection. But my name is Brett Trapp. Hopefully you know that by now. And I'm going to be your host for today's event. I'm very excited. And I want to start just by saying thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on Harbor. Thank you for trusting me. Over the last many months, a lot of you guys have reached out and told me how much Blue Babies Pink meant to you. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the encouragement and thank you for all the nice things that you've said. So why are we here? As you know, in 2016, I wrote a blog called Blue Babies Pink. Episode 29 was the story of me coming out to my mom, and the story was called Lifeboats. And for whatever reason, that story had tremendous resonance, particularly with parents, as that was my best attempt at sort of explaining what it was like to be a gay person and what it felt like sort of to come out. So over the next few months, I began to talk to parents and began to hear a lot of sort of recurring themes. So I began to develop this program and thought a long time about the name. And I wanted it to kind of connect to that lifeboats metaphor. And the name I chose was Harbor. Harbor has two meanings. Here they are. I want you to listen to this. As a noun, harbor is a place on the coast where vessels may find shelter. Which I love that. And as a verb, it means to give home or shelter to. So in one sense, you are a harbor, and you are also providing harbor for your children, which I think is great. So two things. Number one, as you know, I am not a parent, but I am gay. So though I don't know a lot about the parenting journey, I've talked to a lot of parents, but I do know a good bit about what it's like to be an LGBT person, and that's the kind of perspective that I want to provide. The second thing that I am not is any kind of guru or expert. I am simply the guide kind of through this process. I'll be guiding you tonight during the live workshop, and then continuing to guide the Harbor community group through Facebook and beyond that. So a really quick story about a guide. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before, but last summer I went whitewater rafting in Colorado. We get in a 15-passenger van, we drive up this mountain to get to the put-in spot for the river. And as we're driving, the guide is in the front of our van giving instructions on what we need to do. So he gets to the part where he has to tell us, here's what to do if you fall out of the boat, which is a very obviously scary experience. He said, if you fall out, you have to participate in your own rescue. You have to participate in your own rescue. And what he meant was you can't just go on your back and wait for me to jump in and save you. You can't just, kind of just cruise down the river because you could get seriously hurt or more. So as soon as he said that phrase, I made a mental note of that because it was such an interesting idea. And I don't believe in total self-sufficiency, right? As people of faith, we believe that God is animating and motivating a lot of what we do. But there is an aspect of this journey of us having to be engaged, us having to participate in the rescue of either ourselves or of sort of the trajectory of our children. Some of you guys have been frozen. That's a very common reaction when a child comes out, is parents can kind of be paralyzed with fear, sometimes for years. And I hope that Harbor is the wake-up call that all of us need to re-engage with our children in a really healthy and really, really good way. A lot of you also know I sent out a questionnaire several months ago. Some of you filled it out. Trying to gauge the pulse of where parents were with their kids. I got lots of incredible responses, but one mom's response kind of broke my heart. Here's what she said. She said, I'm frustrated with myself for not feeling strong enough to do this well enough for my daughter. I'm frustrated with myself for not feeling strong enough to do this well enough for my daughter. And to be honest, that totally broke my heart because I resonate with that, having heard similar words and similar things from other parents, that many of us are doing the best we can. Me as a kid, as a gay man, I'm doing the best I can. I know my mom's doing the best she can. But a lot of times what it comes down to is we just need to have shifts in mindset, shifts in how we think about some of these things. And that's what I hope Harbor is. And don't forget, guys, you probably won't agree. Some of you won't agree with everything that's going to be said tonight, and that's okay. As you guys know, this topic can be extremely volatile and extremely emotional. We've all been in that spot where we've been hurt or wounded. And I don't think anything is going to be too dramatic like that in tonight's content. But at the same time, let's remind ourselves it's okay if we hear things we don't agree with. That's going to challenge us just to think more deeply about the things at hand. Okay, we're about to cut to our first segment. Again, the questionnaire I put out several months ago, we had 600 parents fill it out, and 400 LGBT people filled out a separate questionnaire. I spent several weeks sort of analyzing the responses. There was multiple choice and open-ended, and I found some very interesting things. So what I want to do is I want to start tonight by reviewing, after looking at all that data, 7 key observations that I made from those questionnaires. So here are the 7 big observations. Check this out. 89% of parents report their child coming out as painful. Not super surprising. What is surprising is that 62% report it as very or extremely painful. That means they're ranking it as a 4 or a 5 on sort of the emotional pain scale. And again, this is what I mean when I talk about how parents, when they talk about their child coming out, they use the language of trauma. It's very, very, very difficult. I think the big takeaway here, obviously very simple. Being distraught is a normal reaction. So if you've guilted yourself about that, or you don't think you should have reacted that way, have some peace. Know that most parents feel the same kind of pain when their child comes out. Observation number 2, parents reported the top 2 emotions when coming out as fear and worry. On this one, I gave them a list of emotions and said, hey, what were the initial emotions you felt when your child came out? By far, the top 2 were fear and worry. And the open-ended question, when I asked them about this, a lot of parents, they listed, fear of gay culture, fear of STDs, fear of their child losing their faith, general worry that life will be very hard for their child. So that's a very common fear. I think our big takeaway here is just to preach the truth to yourself. I mean, anytime when we're besieged with fear and worry, we have to remind ourselves and kind of preach the daily truth that, God is in control, and that's more than just a Christian cliche. All right, observation number 3. First off, one of the questions I asked was, I said, hey, select any thoughts you had when your child came out. So these were the options I gave them. We have to keep this a secret. I have failed as a parent. Yay, my child can finally be who they are. What will my friends think? It's probably just a phase. I want to help my child overcome these feelings. So my question for you is, what do you think was the most common response here? Kind of surprising. This was it. The most common thought of this list was, what will my friends think? Now listen to these quotes. This was from the open-ended questions I asked. Here's some quotes that parents gave me. Quote, "It will sound vain and shallow, but the struggle I have is not that my son is gay. It's with my fear of judgment from friends and coworkers." Second quote, "Until she is ready to be fully out, I feel like I'm hiding from the world along with her. Our family knows, but I haven't been open with many friends. Part of the reticence is the great unknown of others' reactions. This is so far out of our box, and social justice has not been a fight we've ever waged before." Here. So the observation here is very simple. Observation number 3, it's natural and normal for parents to be concerned about what others will think. Again, this is a very normal reaction for social creatures like us. The big takeaway here, however, is that we need to master the practice of not caring what others think. And this is something that, for your kids, they've probably gotten a lot of practice at this, but you're going to have to master that too, is learning to just care less about others' opinions. Observation 4, here it is. Most parents feel very alone. So what I did on this one is I put the statement, I feel very alone on this journey, and then I had parents, rank if they disagreed or agreed with that statement. 47% said they agree or strongly agree with the statement that they feel very alone. So about half of parents feel like they're doing this all on their own. The big takeaway here, again, is obvious. We need community. We have been going it for far too long. And again, I think it's natural to kind of put your head in the sand at times and not tell anyone. I think a lot of parents react that way early. But once the dust settles, once the smoke clears, it's time to get involved in community, which is exactly why I started Harbor. Now, our last three observations are from LGBT people. I also polled them and asked them some questions. So one of the open-ended questions I asked was this to LGBT folks: what is your greatest frustration with your parents? I got over 400 responses, and they were quite interesting. Here's the observation around that one. Observation number 5, many parents are still denying the situation exists. Here's some quotes from a few LGBT folks. I wish my parents would just acknowledge it, even if only once per year. Another one, I just wish their mantra of we love you didn't look like withdrawal. Here's another quote, by not pretending that my girlfriend doesn't exist. And finally, small things like including my partner in group texts like they do with my brother-in-law. Ask me more questions about our plans for the future, like having kids or buying a house together. This was a very common theme that a lot of LGBT folks cited, was just the fact that their parents were still kind of in denial about it. The big takeaway here is to accept the situation for what it is, not for what you wish it were. I love a quote here. My mom was actually the first one to bring this to my attention. It's sort of a meme that just floats around the internet, but here's the quote. A secret to happiness is letting every situation be what it is instead of what you think it should be and making the best of it. So that is definitely the takeaway there. Observation number 6, also in polling LGBT kids. Number 6, most kids want to be able to talk more openly about the sexuality thing with their parents. I use the word most here because not all. Some kids reported that their parents were being a little bit too aggressive in asking them about their sexuality. But here are a few quotes, again, from the survey. One person said, I wish my parents would ask more questions. I have to bring it up, so I feel selfish for making them uncomfortable. But if I don't bring it up, I'm less known by them. Well, here's another quote. Ask questions, read a book. Just in any way show that they're willing to even discuss it, even if we still disagree. So the big takeaway here, guys, we've got to cultivate the courage to graciously talk to our kids about their sexuality. And I use the word cultivate there very intentionally because I do believe that courage is something that can grow with time. The awkwardness can diminish, our courage can increase, and over time, these conversations can become a lot more natural and a lot more healthy. Okay, final observation, number 7. Here it is. Your kids want to know you're doing the work of trying to understand. This was a very common theme in our open-ended question. Lots of kids reported something along these lines. Here's a few direct quotes. Quote, my parents could show more initiative in seeking out resources. Second quote, I think my dad would benefit from books, blogs, or other resources that didn't condemn him for his conservative beliefs. One more quote. I wish my parents would learn more about what it's like being gay in our world. Show more interest in looking into resources like books, etc., to show they want to have more knowledge about what I face and how they can support me. So obviously the big takeaway here is this. Let your kids know you're trying. You invested in Harbor. I'm a big fan of your kids knowing that you made a financial investment for this course, for this program, and hopefully that will give your kids some peace. You know, hey, mom and dad, maybe we don't disagree. Maybe there's been tension in the past, but you know what? They're trying. They're doing their best. And so to me, that is a really positive aspect of Harbor. Guys, Harbor exists to address all of these things. So we're going to get to a lot of them. So stay tuned. Okay, our first video interview of the evening is going to be with my mother, Laura Trapp Rodich. If you read Blue Baby's Pink, you know I wrote a lot about my mom. I love my mom. She's incredible. But as you may know, we have come to different conclusions around the issue of sexuality. I am on the gay affirming side. She is on the more traditional side. And we've had a long journey, I'm going to be honest, of getting to where we are, where we get along great and love each other deeply. So a few weeks back, I sat down, interviewed my mom over Skype, and I think you're really going to like this conversation. Check it out. How's it going?
Going good. Just waiting for your call.
Good. Well, this is awesome. I'm so happy that we're going to do this. So I am in Atlanta, and tell everybody where you are.
I am in Fisherville, Kentucky, right outside of Louisville, Kentucky. So.
That's right, amongst the tobacco fields.
Yes, the tobacco fields.
Well, Mom, I'm really glad to have you on. I know all of the Harbor parents are excited to hear from you, and I really appreciate you agreeing to do this.
I'm glad to be a part of it. So glad to get to talk to them as well.
Good. So, Mom, kick us off for the viewers. Tell us a little bit about sort of how and where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in the Deep South in Jackson, Mississippi, and a family of 6 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls. I was the third from the bottom. A great home. My parents became Christians when I was about 8, and so from that point on, church was a regular part of our life every time the doors were open, and I'm very thankful for the foundation that they gave me and for the home that I had. Stayed in Mississippi, graduated from high school there, and went to Mississippi State. So go Dogs, but Roll Tide too.
There you go. And you met Dad in what year was it?
It was 1969, actually, December 29th of 1969, in the middle of my senior year of high school, on a blind date up in North Alabama. My best friend had moved up there, and she fixed me up, and it was a good date. Ended up lasting for over 32 years. So.
Good. So you guys got married and moved to. You started off in Alabama, right?
We did. We started off in Sheffield, Alabama, and lived there for 6 or 7 years, and then moved to Texas for 6, where you were born, and then back to Florence, Alabama, where we stayed until he died.
So for a long time, you were sort of a career pastor's wife, I guess. I mean, that wasn't your career, but you were a pastor's wife for many years. What was that like? Did you like being a pastor's wife?
Yes, I did. I loved it because I just had a heart for ministry and loved your dad. He was so wonderful at what he did and was such a pastor, a true pastor with a pastor's heart. And so I always felt like it was an honor and a privilege to be his wife and to serve in that capacity. It was never a burden. It was never something hard for me. It was something I always loved.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a lot about, in Blue Baby Speak, just about my upbringing and growing up with an awesome mom and dad, and just being super thankful for everything that you guys gave to me as a child, and that was, I think, surprising to some of the viewers or readers of Blue Baby Speak, because I guess sometimes people think that gay people had a terrible upbringing, but I certainly was not the case. You guys were great and gave me a fantastic home, and I'm super thankful for that. So we'll fast forward the clock a little bit. August 29th, 2011 was sort of my D-Day that I had been sort of dreading, just because I think most gay folks coming out to your parent is probably the hardest conversation. And so August 29th, it was probably, 6 or 7 p.m. You're having dinner with Brian, who's my brother, and his family. I knock on the door, and then tell me kind of what you remember from that day.
I remember it very well. We were here in this house, of course, and we just finished dinner with Brian and his family and my 2 grandchildren, and we had that knock on the door. And when I saw you standing there, I was puzzled and concerned all at the same time, because I knew it probably didn't mean something good if you'd driven all the way from Atlanta and surprised us.
Yeah, I was probably the most nervous I've ever been in my whole life. Literally was kind of shaking on the drive to your house. So we go in the living room. I remember I put a chair kind of in the middle of the living room. You guys sat on the couch. And then I told you that I was, the word I used at that time was same-sex attracted. What did you think? What was your initial sort of gut response to that?
Well, I think all of us, because Brian was there, his wife, my husband, your stepdad, and me. And my gut reaction was concern for you. It was obvious that this was hard for you, and it wasn't, of course, something that I wanted to hear, because I did not want this to be true for you, because I knew it would so impact your future. So, but at the very moment, we all were calm. We didn't cry. We didn't have an emotional breakdown. It was a very the conversation, if I recall, I hope, and from your writing about it, I feel like that we did pretty well, because all of us kind of held it together. I think the main emotion that all of us were feeling, all 4 of us, was concern for you, as you shared that.
Yeah, I was, pleasantly surprised. I mean, I knew you guys wouldn't react poorly, but you always kind of you have to kind of be prepared for the conversation to go south. And I've told many people that I thought you guys did really well in that first conversation with very shocking news that came as a surprise. But you're right, you guys were very supportive, very loving. I remember kind of looking across and seeing you guys. It seemed like there was a little bit of a bewilderment and sort of just the initial shock that was there. But overall, I thought, you guys did great. So then talk about, sort of the days and weeks after that. How did you process through, after the shock wore off, how did you process through all that? Where did your mind go?
Well, the first 2 weeks were really hard. During our conversation that night, we questioned you a lot about counseling, and you volunteered. You told us how you had tried counseling. You'd done a lot of the things I would have suggested if I'd known earlier, and you'd already been there, done that. So I knew that this was something you had spent a lot of time trying to process, and so it was pretty much set. What you told me was, I think when a child comes out when they're much younger, parents are tempted to think, well, this is a phase, this is something that can be changed or that will change. But at 30 years old, when you came to us, it was pretty well, this is the reality that we have to deal with. So by the very next day, and you recall I was starting a brand new job the next day, and as they were trying to train me, I couldn't stop crying, which was embarrassing, and I couldn't explain to them why. And I finally just said, I just had something very emotionally upsetting I'm trying to deal with. Please forgive me. And we made it through that. But for the first 2 weeks, I was physically sick. I remember staying in bed a lot. It was so upsetting to me because in that moment when your child tells you this, you really go through a grief process and it's very, very hard. It's like hearing someone you love has died, because there is a death of the child that you thought you had and the life that you envisioned for them. And, with the wife and the picket fence and the grandchildren, and there's a death of that. And then you have to turn and embrace the child that you do have. And so that is not an easy process. It was very emotional. It was very upsetting and very hard. The first 2 weeks especially, literally, I was very, very sick.
Yeah, I remember I saved a lot of the texts and emails from back then. And I remember you saying that you had been sick in bed that week. And that made me really sad to think of that. And I guess at the time I thought that was unusual, but it's funny how since then I've talked to so many parents who say, they had the same reaction. And so now looking back, I think that was a very common and kind of normal reaction,
Migraine, could not get up. I mean, literally, physically very sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like after we had that first conversation, we kind of had our email battle. We both sent lots of emails back and forth, I think, for the next couple of months. And I think that was just us sort of processing together this information. And that's when we got into theology, we got into counseling, and I know you were pushing me to get into counseling, which I did for a little bit. But we really didn't, I think after that, we didn't talk about it.
Right.
For a long time. I mean, a couple of years, it just became this unspoken thing. Why do you think that was?
Several reasons for that. One reason that's probably not the primary one, but at some point during that period, you mentioned that you'd met, a nice guy. I think this is when you just started dating, and I asked you one day if you were going shopping or something. So you're going with your friend, and you kind of cut me off. It was like, don't ask me that. So that kind of scared me a little bit, because I thought, okay, he doesn't want me to say it. But I think the main reason for me, and as a parent, I think a lot of parents, traditional parents, will identify with this. The more, if we talk, first of all, you're uncomfortable talking with your child about their sexuality. Every parent is. Just like a child doesn't want to talk to their parent about their sexuality. It's like, no, you don't talk about that. No. So you don't want to talk about it. The other thing is, you don't want to acknowledge that it's really real. And so if you just don't bring it up, don't talk about it, maybe it'll go away. So, so as a parent, as a Christian parent, you're just praying, as I was praying, Lord, just open his eyes, bring some special girl into his life that's going to just, open his eyes to his true nature and bring that guy, that, and just waiting for that to happen. So if you talk about it, how are you doing? Are you seeing anybody? How's your, if you start talking about it, it makes it more real. So I think it's real natural for parents not to talk about it for all of those reasons.
Yeah, and that That makes sense. It's funny, like when you recall that story of me, because you kind of fast forwarded. I think it was about 2014 when I began to date, 3 years after I first came out, and you told the story about how I kind of snapped at you when you asked if I was seeing my friend or was with my friend.
That's right. That was after you had started.
But I remember that conversation. But I remember from my perspective, I think in an email you had said, Brett, I cannot bear to hear you talk about dating. I think it was just so painful for you to hear me even talk about being on a date with someone. And I interpreted that as, okay, if she can't bear it, I'm not gonna make her hear it. So I'm just gonna shut down and not talk about it. And so I think that's a classic example of, kind of a breakdown in communication. And so 2015, I think that was our kind of our rock bottom year. I remember it very well. We emailed a little bit that year, but we really didn't talk on the phone. And I think that was on me. I was just upset. I was in an angry place because this is, I think, where you and I had begun to really ratchet up our emails and a lot of the kind of the theology discussions back and forth. And I went back and pulled up some of those emails. And this isn't an email that you sent to me in February of that year. Here's what you said. You said, Brett, please don't let this sever you from your own mother. The challenge is, can you accept me if I continue to believe that homosexuality are outside of God's will, to say the least, no matter what the context? I am prepared to love you no matter what. Can you do the same for me? Talk more about that. Kind of where did that kind of come from, and what was your reasoning, I guess, for saying that?
If you recall, when you first sent me the first email, you told me in an email that you were going to change your commitment to celibacy and decide to date and look for a partner. And you gave me your reasons why and how your theology had sort of changed on that. So I remember that email very well, whenever that was that you sent it. And in that same email, you said, I really want to know your thoughts on this. So you invited me to share my thoughts on my theology regarding same-sex relationships, committed monogamous relationships, and so forth. And I didn't answer immediately because I knew I needed to pray about this. Plus, I wanted to hear what the Lord had to say. I wanted to really earnestly seek Him and see if I'd missed anything. So I did for a few days, and then I gave you a response back. Okay, I felt like He showed me, okay, this is what my thoughts are on this. This is what I felt like the Lord said. So, and basically I just conveyed to you my commitment to a traditional view, that this is what my conviction is. This is what I believe truth is. This is what I believe the Lord has said. And I can't say anything different because I can't lie to you. So this is what my belief is. You asked me, well, that was very painful and hard for you to hear. And no matter how gently I said it, and I don't remember if it was gentle or not, I don't still have the emails, but I always tried to be. But you were going through a lot, and I understood that. And so there was an exchange of emails because that's not the answer you wanted from me, and I couldn't give you the answer that you wanted. My place of saying, will you accept me? Because I am prepared to accept you. Even though we disagree on this, I love you. I want a relationship with you. Can you love me the same way if I can't budge over here and say, yeah, this is great? So it was kind of agreeing to disagree. And I think all of us, parents and kids alike, have to come to that point and respect each other.
Yeah, and I remember during that same time in that year where we were going back and forth, I don't think I ever thought you and Brian, who's our brother, hated gay people. I certainly never thought that. The point I was trying to make was it is very painful when the only acceptable path is sort of that single celibate path, and I said that feels hateful when someone's expecting you to sort of kind of die on your own hill of singleness. It feels that way, and again, this is where obviously you and I disagree, but that was me trying to hopefully come across and help you understand, like, I know you love me, I don't doubt that, but in this moment around this topic, it feels very, very very, very tough, and it feels like it was a tough pill to swallow. So I think you're right. I definitely, that was the point of our email kind of battles for so long, was you trying to convince me of your side and me trying to convince you of my side. And I think that's where everything really began to break down, because as you just said, we were both trying to change each other. And I think that's where things got really, really dicey. So in 2016, I began to date the person I'm dating now. And so this was the first time I had a serious relationship. And I think this is where I began to ask the tough questions that I had never asked, which was, okay, can I bring this person to mom's house, for Christmas? Will he be welcome there? I don't know. What about if we have kids? Well, if we get married, so playing out sort of those scenarios in the future, it started to just get really, really real. And I think that's when the conversation began to shift, because we were both sort of looking at the future, realizing, hey, we've got to figure this out. We don't want to lose this relationship. So kind of tell what that period was like for you and what kind of began to change, I think, in both of us, but kind of talk about it from your perspective.
So when you started dating your partner, my first thought, like with any of my boys, when they started settling in on somebody they care about, you want to know what kind of person they are, obviously. And what's made it such a blessing for me is what a wonderful person that he is. So that was a help, because not always, sometimes your kid doesn't bring home somebody you really like. Sometimes there's character problems, sometimes there's different faith, sometimes there's no faith. That was not true for you. So it has not been hard at all. I mean, there are some parameters, as you know, because to be consistently true to our faith and conviction, like we don't want y'all to share a room together here at the house and so forth, because and you don't live together now, but because we're responsible for our own home. So there are some parameters that we're not prepared to compromise on. But as far as that person being in our family, I just see it as my son number 4. I respect y'all's relationship, your care for each other, and the fact that you love each other. And I'm thankful for him, and I hope you hang on to him.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think 2016 is when I saw a shift in you. I know I went through a shift. I think this was the Lord sort of working this in both of us. I came to a place to say, Brett, you've got to let go of trying to change your mom, of trying to convince her of your position. You've got to utterly just let go of that. And I think what was interesting was that you were having that same conversation, I think, with the Lord. Talk about that. What caused that shift, and how did your mindset change in the midst of that?
Well, one thing that really helped me, and I wanted parents that are listening to hear this, I was never trying to convince you of my position or change you. I was trying to defend my position, because I felt like it was not being respected at that point early on when we were having such a hard time. But then something that helped, and it seemed to really help shift and increase the communication between us, was when I just started reading some other things from a different perspective. I started branching out, and I mentioned Torn, the book Torn by Justin Lee, who is a young man very similar to you, and it's kind of his personal journey, his blue baby's pink, if you will. That book was very helpful to me. I didn't totally agree with where he went at the end, but it was very helpful to kind of see inside his head of I didn't have blue baby's pink. So that book was the first to help me get a little more inside your head and your struggle. So when you knew that I was looking for these things and reading, I think that helped you. It helped you to understand, hey, she is really trying to empathize. She's not against me. So I would encourage parents to do that, to look for resources that can help them understand the struggles, understand the inner turmoil that their child has been through before they ever have told them. So that was a turning point for me. And also spiritually, Bob and I were growing in some ways that really helped me to have more peace and not to be panic stricken.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what we've talked about this before. You just talked about learning to just trust God with me, or kind of letting go of maybe worrying about that. What was that like, or how did you get there?
Well, that's a long story. It has to do with personal revival and personal renewal in my life, and that was a journey really independent of the struggle with you, something that God just started doing for Bob and I together. Actually started in 2013. And basically just a personal renewal that he and I, in our personal walk with him, started going through together, where we started drawing nearer to him in intimate relationship, not just reading scriptures. We've done that. I mean, we've both been in ministry over 50 years. You know that. So we knew the Bible backwards and forwards. But we started hearing some teaching that was encouraging us more toward, I hate to use the word mystical, but a more intimate interaction and relationship with the Lord. And as we got to know him better, even better than we had for all the decades before that we've been Christians, that there's a peace in that, because as you draw near to him, he changes you. And so there was a much greater strength in me, even though I was a strong Christian when you came out to us by the world's standards. I don't know how strong I was by God's standards. Several years later, when you started dating, I just was in a position of such peace and confidence in who I was in him and who he is. And there's nothing too big for him. I just had more peace. And it started with developing more intimacy with the Lord, just getting to know him better. And in getting to know him, as we draw near to him, he's light. And his light just exposes dark things in us. So I had gone through a lot of personal repentance. And, you know, honey, as we talk about this with a traditionalist like me that thinks technically this behavior is sin, not the orientation, then we're talking about issues of the heart anyway that we have no control over. Only the Holy Spirit can change any of us. And so as the Lord began showing me and Bob, as we drew near to him, his light would just expose. He wasn't being mean, he was just being light. Because God is light, as you draw near to him, it shines a light on things. And Bob and I both, we said to each, we didn't realize how much sin, how much darkness was in us. So all of us have those places of darkness, you see. And so if I have my eye on one place in you that I think is not aligned with him, that's not my job to expose that. My job is to love you, to be a consistent believer for you, but to just love you unconditionally. So we were in a place of personal revival that changed my reaction to hard things. It gave me a lot more peace, foundation. So I can't stress enough how parents need to lean in to knowing more.
Yeah, because I saw a huge shift in kind of our interactions. For a while I was sort of feeling, because of our emails, I was feeling sort of browbeat. I was feeling like you were having to remind me that you were not okay with this. But then I saw that came to a stop. And I think that was where you just became okay with the fact that you didn't have to, I've often said, or someone else has said, once you tell your child you don't condone or agree with this, that's typically enough. They're not going to assume that you have shifted your views. And so now we're in a place where, I bring my boyfriend home and you're very kind and loving towards him, and you're very loving and you've been great towards him. But I know where you stand. And I don't assume that means that you validate, kind of our relationship.
And parents need to know that you can love and support your gay child and their boyfriend or girlfriend. And it doesn't mean you endorse and approve everything. A lot of Christian parents think if I'm good to them, that means I'm saying this is okay. No. Jesus, in the passage where Jesus, the woman caught in adultery, was brought to him, you remember? And he said, where are your accusers? And she said, is there no one? And he said, no one, Lord. And he said, I don't condemn you either. Now go and sin no more. Somehow there was an ability for him to love her and not to compromise, but he did not condemn. And for many of us, we have to get out of that condemnation phase. Once we say it one time, we know that, our loved one knows what we think. You don't need to stay on that point. That becomes God's business. Your business is to keep relationship and to have a loving and supportive relationship with your child.
Yeah, I've kind of described it to people in the most blunt terms. Your and I relationship is each of us thinks that the other's beliefs do harm. To be honest, I think you would say that my beliefs on this do harm to the purity of the gospel and potentially to me. I would say that sort of your belief system does harm to LGBT people. And I think that's where, if you camp out on that, that's where things can get really ugly. And I think what I've had to learn, and I think what you've learned, is we've got to even give grace in that to say, I'm going to let go and stop holding this person hostage to kind of come around to this viewpoint. And I'm going to give them grace that, again, even with you, in my mind, I've now framed our relationship as, Brett, your mom is doing the best that she can with her understanding of God and with the scriptures. This is her position, and you've got to make peace with that. And I hope, and I think that you've done the same thing for me, sort of charitably to say, he's doing the best he can as well. And I think once we kind of both embrace that mindset, I feel like our relationship got a lot healthier very quickly. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a challenge to me to in this culture, because there's such a shift away from a traditional view, I think parents that have the firm, a firm traditional conviction have a little bit harder position now than parents who are more willing to or feel like they can go over more to that other side. So I'm happy that there's some support being offered for parents. And so we want, above all, and this is one of the things I would say to parents, above all, we want to maintain the ability to have influence in the lives of our grown children. If you cut the dialogue off with statements that are alienating, then you lose influence. So we've got to find a way to be true and faithful to what we believe without compromising that, but yet keep a loving relationship and maintain influence in their life. And I don't want to lose relationship with any of my sons. And because there's no, as every parent would say, there's no one we love more.
Well, Mom, this has been awesome. Any final thoughts? What would you tell to parents who are watching? What is your advice, or what words of wisdom would you have?
There were several things I jotted down if I can remember them. The first one would be, to any parent, is to draw near to the Lord personally. That would be my first recommendation. Get alone with Him and say, you know what, this is not about my child. First of all, this is about me and my relationship with you. I need to know you more. I need to know you more intimately, because you are my rock and my fortress, and you're my hope. And I need to know you, and I need you to show me what's wrong in my life. And so draw near to the Lord, get your confidence on Him. Let Him tell you what to do. Do not make your decisions based upon the culture or what's politically correct or even what your pastor may say. Hear what God says, how to respond to your child, how to respond in love, to be a support to them, and know what you believe. Stand on what you believe, but let Him direct you in your steps. I would encourage parents, too, to not be afraid. Start reading other things or exposing yourself to other viewpoints, especially from an empathetic point where you can understand your child better. Brett's blog is absolutely a great resource. Also, the book I mentioned, Torn by Justin Lee, and there's some others out there that will help you to understand them. And also, let me say this to parents, give your child time to work. There's going to be periods that they are going to feel very alienated from you, especially if you maintain consistently a traditional view. If you say it once, you don't need to say it again. They already know what you think, what you believe, what your conviction is. But give them time and understand that this is very emotional for them, very painful. And they're probably going to say some things that hurt you, and they may cut off contact with you for a while. But you just stay there and be faithful and wait for them to come back and try to keep those. So give them time and respect that this is emotionally painful for them. So that's one of the things that I feel like some wisdom the Lord did give me, because I sensed when we were having that time back and forth that this was really, you were having a harder time than I was. So parents, be very empathetic with your child and be patient with them. Draw near to the Lord. Let Him tell you what your path should be. Get it from Him, not from A, B, or C or the culture. Let Him tell you how to walk through this. He will direct you one step at a time to be a light and a support for your child, to lead them to their best destiny, which, Brett, you've heard me say this many times. This is what my prayer is for you and for your significant other and for any other people I know and don't know that are in the gay community, and for all of us, for me, is that we would fulfill, if we know Him, first know Him, and then that we would fulfill that destiny that was preordained before time. And wherever that leads, that He would fulfill, bring you to that point of fruition where you are the person and are accomplishing those tasks, according to Ephesians 2:10, that He prepared for you before time. You may not be there yet. I don't think I'm there yet. I'm 65. I still have some things but my goal is, before I die, I want to accomplish some of those things that were prepared for me. I've done a lot of things that were just my own good idea, but I want to accomplish the things He has ordained for me. And I want that for you and for all my kids.
Well, Mom, hear me say I love you, and have never doubted your love for me. Never have, never will. And I'm just thankful for you and thankful for your love for me, your love for Brett, my boyfriend. And to me, you are just a shining example of Jesus, and you always have and always will be. And I know there will probably be, times of conflict and disagreement in the future, but I believe that we'll get through it, and I'm really glad you're my mom.
You're always my baby. You know that. No matter how much you are, how much gray is in the beard. I love you.
I love. Okay, so next up, I flew out to Austin, Texas a few weeks back to meet with Susan Cottrell. Susan leads a ministry called Freedhearts. Over the years, Susan has met with thousands and thousands of parents, helping them navigate this journey of parenting an LGBT child. She has some incredible insights. We actually filmed 2 separate videos, a sort of a freestanding talk as well as a Q&A. We're going to save the Q&A for later, a few weeks from now, but tonight we're going to listen to Susan talk about what it means to have self-care. How can you take care of yourself on this very trying journey of being a parent? So here it is. This is Susan.
Cottrell, and I founded Freedhearts to help parents like you. My husband Rob and I were in the evangelical conservative church for 25 years. We were leaders. We raised our kids there. And then our oldest daughter told us she was bisexual. That was a shock. We did not expect that. And suddenly everything changed. We knew everything had changed in our relationship to the church. So I want to give you some steps to help you in whatever situation you're in to care for yourself as you're on this journey. Number 1 is to accept and surrender to God's hand in this. This is not a surprise to God. You don't have to worry about that. It can be very hard because what you want to do if you're like a lot of conservative Christians is you want to shove them back in the box, put the lid on it, and pretend this never happened. I know. But instead, let's recognize that this is God's child, and God has allowed this child to be the way this child is, because shoving it back in won't help you or your family. You've got to say, okay, God, this is yours. You got this. Whatever you want to do, I'm your willing vessel. You want to pray for wisdom so you don't fly off into that spinning shame and embarrassment that often happens. You may know the story of King David and the man who threw rocks at him and cursed him. It's in 2 Samuel 16. And David's mighty men are saying, can we just kill him? And David said, no. If God sent this man to curse me, it is for my growth, and I will take what he has to offer. We could use that as parents a lot more to say, God, whatever you're sending, it's for me, and I will take whatever you have. That goes a long way. When your child comes out, it can very much feel like the end of the world, but it's not. God is still present. God still has a plan. And what a lot of parents find out is that God works through the child to change the parent. That's a relief. God is certainly well able to do whatever needs to be done in our kids. That's not our job. What our job is to see what God wants to do in us and let it be. Our job is to respond to God for us. Number 2 is pray for God's direction for you and your child. I have a large private Facebook group of moms of LGBT children, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender children. And we really support and encourage each other in there. And moms will tell us that when they pray to God and they say, God, what do you want to show me here? God will say things like, your child's fine. Don't worry about it. You love them. I'll take care of you. I got this. Those are comforting words to Christian parents. So just pray for God's words for you. Instead of panic, you can have peace. And no, continuing to tell them that they're wrong is not God's voice. That we don't see that anywhere from Jesus. Just loving them is what we're told to do. So let God direct you in how to treat your gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender child. Number 3 is journal. Begin now and write down your thoughts and everything the Spirit shows you along the way. Include all your feelings of shock and grief and shame and embarrassment and joy and peace and love. Write it all down. Let God have it. This will help you manage your thoughts and will be a beautiful record of how God has moved you along this path. This job is too big for you and me. To parent well is too big, and we have to let God take care of it in us. So in the interest of self-care, just lay down your agenda, your plan, your yes buts, your what ifs, and let God guide you. Number 4 is hang on to the verses God gives you. Here are some to get you started. Matthew 22:36-40. Jesus said, "Love God, love others. This is the greatest command. Everything else will fit under that." Please don't be afraid to love your child unconditionally without exception. That's our main job. Well, I love my child, that's why I'm throwing them out of the house. No, that's not love. Jesus showed us what love is, and it's treating somebody the way we want to be treated. Makes it pretty simple. Read 1 Corinthians 13. It's a really good understanding of what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs. That'll be a good one to have in your journal. The next verse is 1 John 4:7. Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. Ooh, isn't that good? I love that. And what does love look like? Verse 18 tells us, such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we're afraid, it is for fear of punishment. And this shows that we have not fully experienced God's perfect love. Wow. Wow. That's a great one to press into. And last is one of my favorite verses from Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. I just love that. Think about all those great things about your child. Are they kind? Are they funny? A neat person? All the things that your child is. Line all those things out. Write them in your journal and think about those things. Being gay is just one aspect of your child. Think about the good things about them, because those things are still true. It will help you in your heart, and it will also help your relationship with them to think in those things. Ask God for more verses just for you and treasure them in your heart. You'll be amazed what they'll do for you. And then number 5 is pamper yourself. Every day, do something kind for yourself that you enjoy. Whether it's read a chapter of a good book, an escape novel, or take a bubble bath, or buy a latte, or eat your favorite meal, or take a walk. You get the idea. Do something that's good for you. Recalibrating our understanding around all this with our kids is hard work. You deserve to be treated. Number 6 is let yourself off the hook. You don't have to answer for your theology. You don't have to answer for yourself. Your obligation is to continue to hear God's voice and let God guide you as much as you can. Set aside your need for answers and just let God bring the answers when God is ready to bring them. You didn't cause this, and it's not yours to fix. You're not answerable that your child is gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. How could you answer for that? You may well be tempted to blame yourself, thinking that you should have done this thing or you could have said that thing, or some magic combination of deeds or words that would have made this not be. But that's false. It's simply not true. You couldn't have caused it, and you couldn't have prevented it. So let yourself off the hook about that. Believe me, gay kids keep showing up in the most stalwart Christian families. So I consider that God's job. This is way bigger than we can handle as parents. It's bigger than anything we could have caused or not. It's God-sized, so do yourself a favor and take it off your shoulders. You'll feel much better. Finally, number 7, find a community of support. You're not alone. You don't need to go on this journey alone. You need people who are ahead of you on this road who can kind of show you the ropes, to encourage you, to say that it's going to work out, and in turn, you'll have something to share with those who come behind you. So get to know other people, other parents, maybe parents of your kids' friends. Contact me for our online support group, but get yourself in community. It will help you. In conclusion, I just want to say that God's got this. God's got you. God's got your child. You don't have to worry about all that. Take heart from a mom who's been there. After our girls came out, our journey has grown so much, deeper, richer, and more full of joy, with each other, with our children, and with God. I wouldn't trade that for anything. That's a lot of family values. God bless you on your journey.
Hang on to the verses God gives you. I love that. Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing those tips. All right, next up, I'm really excited. We're going to shift gears and get extremely practical. One of the most common things I've heard talking to parents is the challenges around communication, communicating with your child specifically. Obviously, it's a touchy topic. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion on both sides, both around life in general, around the theology aspect. There's a lot to think through. So let me read a few quotes. Again, back to my questionnaire. Here's what parents said in regards to the communication thing. I'm curious if any of this resonates with you guys. Quote, I never know if what I'm going to say is the right thing. My son doesn't have a lot of grace or patience. Next quote, that I feel like I'm walking on eggshells talking to her. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Another parent, not being able to communicate with my son about personal stuff, life stuff, getting married, having kids, dating, etc. I haven't gotten to the point where it's comfortable for me to see it as normal, so we don't talk about it. 2 more. I still feel like maybe I'm prying when I ask him about his relationships. And the last one, I wish he'd be more open with me regarding his struggles in this area. I wish I knew how to bring it up in a non-threatening way. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. How do you engage with conversation? So this is going to be 8 tips for opening up the lines of conversation with your child. Very specific, very practical. I would encourage you to take notes on this part. We will be sending out notes later, but if you want to take them now, even better. So tip number 1, here we go. First is own the wrong things you've said in the past and ask for forgiveness. Number 1, own the wrong things that have been said in the past and ask for forgiveness. Guys, there is something incredibly powerful about a parent asking their child for forgiveness. I can remember where I was sitting in my home when I was about 17 years old when my dad asked for me to forgive him. He had said something bad, I think, about another pastor across town. He said that in front of me, and then a couple days later he came back and said, hey, Brett, I want you to know that thing that I said, I'm sorry for that. Will you forgive me for dishonoring that man? I was completely blown away at the humility with that. Now, I know if you're watching this, if you're part of the Harbor community, you've probably already done this. You've probably already asked for forgiveness. But LGBT people, remember. We remember the things that were said. And for better or for worse, I wish we could all move on and push these things aside, but they are oftentimes burned in our brains. So I would encourage you, maybe even revisit if you've already done it once and say, hey, have I done anything to hurt you? Have I said anything to hurt our relationship? That takes incredible humility to do that, but I think it would really honor your child. So start the conversation, start sort of this new season by asking for forgiveness. Number 2, paint a picture of healthy communication. Paint a picture of healthy communication. Listen, guys, things may be hard, but your child has to know that you believe that things are going to get better. Things are going to get healthier. Things are going to eventually kind of smooth over. I would encourage you to state your intentions. Here's some exact phrasing for you. Hey, I want us to get to a place where we can talk about this in an easy way. Hear that when you talk about, hey, I want us to get there, right? You're talking about a future preferred state where things are not as tough and awkward as they are now. Here's another phrase you can use. I know it's tough now, but I believe it's going to get easier with time. Right? By just saying that, you're casting vision of a better future state that gives your child hope that, hey, things are tough now, but they're going to be better. So paint a picture of healthy communication and a better positive state. Number 3, here we go. Be the student, ask them their story. It's one point. Be the student, ask them their story. Guys, human beings love being asked their story, typically, right? I mean, when I'm out at a social event, a great conversation starter that most people don't ask is, hey, tell me your story, as opposed to, how's it going or what do you do? Tell me your story. Now, the caveat here, of course, is that some of your kids are not prepared to tell their story and they don't want to. But I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of them would love to tell the story of what it was like growing up. What was it like growing up in your home? What was it like growing up in your church? What was it like growing up in your community? Guys, this is hard, right? My suspicion is that a lot of you would be scared to death of this question. I think I would be scared of this question because we're scared of what our child might ask us, right? But I would challenge you to have the courage to ask that question, because that could be a really healing moment for you and your child, to allow them to tell you their story if they're comfortable. Number 4, here we go. Have courage through the awkwardness. Have courage through the awkwardness. Guys, we're just going to have to get cozy with awkwardness, right? You no longer have a life free of awkwardness around this topic. It just is what it is. For me, having these conversations for years, I still get awkward. Talking to friends, talking to family, it's just part of the package. And so we can resist it, fight it, bemoan it, or we can just sort of say, you know what, I'm just going to make friends with the awkwardness of this conversation, and I'm no longer going to allow that to hold me in fear. I think even just acknowledging that with your kid, to say, you know what, this is awkward for me and it's kind of hard, but I believe it's good. I believe talking about these things is good, and I believe that it's healthy. Being an LGBT person is scary enough. And a lot of your kids, before they came out to you, listen close, I promise they laid in their bed scared to death about having these conversations. So you can take the lead and diminish and eliminate that fear, because if mom or dad feels okay talking about this and they're kind of leaning into it, that's going to give them the freedom to say, you know what, this is a safe place to talk about really hard and challenging things. The key there is courage. I'm going to say that word a lot. We have to have courage, and we have to lean in even when it's super difficult. Number 5, lace your words with grace. Lace your words with grace. Listen, a lot of your kids feel preconditioned to being attacked. If you guys have a past history of a lot of contentious talk around this conversation, that could cause it. Guys, LGBT people, we're just kind of always in a defensive posture. When you see things in the news, when you hear some of the terrible stories of discrimination, that affects us. And so a lot of us are kind of in a very defensive pose. And so if you're going to go there with your child, you have to lace the conversation with grace. Here I'm going to give you now some exact phrases. I would challenge you to write these down, put them on flashcards. You need to integrate these phrases deeply into your conversation, because that's going to help your child feel less threatened. Here's the first one. Ready? Hey, can you help me understand blank? Help me understand, right? When you come to a point where you're not sure what is happening, what's being talked about, asking your child to explain it to you, helping you understand, is a very, very positive phrase. Here's another one. I wonder if, fill in the blank, right? What I love about that phrase is it creates a curious tone that you are a listener, and that you are listening and having sort of a humble spirit in that conversation. Here's another one. What do you think about blank, right? What do you think about? And this could be anything. This could be politics, pop culture, theology, but just saying, hey, what do you think about XYZ? Giving your child the chance to give their thoughts and opinions could be very healing for them. Here's another one. This is good. . That's a good point. I think I need to think about that some more. That's a good point. I think I need to think about that some more. What I love about this one is it buys you some time, right? None of us have all the answers. And I think your child, probably can sniff out if maybe you don't have a lot of confidence in a response. So buy yourself enough time, validate the point being made, and then say, you know what? I'm going to think about that some more. 4 more. Ready? Am I understanding you correctly? So your child makes a point. Maybe it's emotional, maybe it's volatile. But asking them if you're understanding correctly, and maybe even repeating it back to them. Hey, you said this. I just want to be clear. Am I understanding you correctly? And that gives them a chance to clarify or to hear back what they said, maybe out of emotion or something that was regrettable. Here's another one. Tell me more about that. ... Child makes a point, and then you just say, hey, that was good. Tell me more about that. Leaning in, asking for more information. This one is kind of a silly one, but I think it's good. I'm stuck. What if you just said, I'm stuck? Again, there's a lot of roadblocks in this conversation. And just admitting that I feel stuck right now. Help me understand X, Y, Z could be a really good thing as well. Now, if you want to make a point in the conversation, here's a good phrase for you. Have you thought about ... Okay, this is a great way to make a point without kind of shoving it down their throat. Say, hey, have you thought about the fact that XYZ, or have you thought about, from this particular angle? That's a great way to, in a non-defensive way, open their mind to be able to hear what you have to say. So that was number 5, lace your words with grace. Okay, number 6, here it is. Celebrate the successful conversations with a follow-up text. So celebrate the successful conversations with a follow-up text. So let's say you go through some of these steps, you sit down, you have a really healthy heart-to-heart that's positive, doesn't get too emotional. I'm a big believer in follow that up with a thank you, right? There's a principle in business that I was taught years ago in my corporate life. What gets celebrated gets reproduced. And this is a very powerful concept in the business world because when an employee sees the boss get excited about something, that employee will do more of that thing. Every single time. It's the same way in your relationship with your child. When they see mom or dad get excited about something, that signals that, hey, this was good. More of that. And so if you have a good conversation, followed up that night or the next day, maybe it's a text message, an email, however you communicate. And here's a phrase you can use. I loved our conversation and I feel better about us. Hey, I loved our conversation and I feel better about us. Right? That lets your child know that, hey, not only did mom or dad sort of just tolerate the conversation, they actually enjoyed it. And now I'm getting a pat on the back for being a participant in this really healthy kind of dialogue back and forth. So gratitude always wins, and it certainly wins in situations or conversations with your child. There's actually only 7 points. I said 8, there's going to be only 7. So here's number 7, and it's very basic. Endless patience. Your child is probably hurting. Endless patience, your child may be hurting. Guys, when I was having these conversations with my mom, I said regrettable things. I said things I should not have said. LGBT people traditionally are very wounded, and we say things that we should not say. And my suspicion is the younger your child is, the more they say that stuff. Let me just tell you now, you have got to gird yourself up with an incredible amount of patience, an incredible amount of grace, and forgiveness to navigate these conversations because, as you know, it can be very hard and extremely stressful. So have a lot of patience. So, guys, those are the 7 tips for better communication. Now, to wrap up, guys, I am not saying that you can never or should never speak hard truths to your child. I do believe that you can, but you have a right to be honest and blunt in your conversation, but you have the obligation to be kind and full of grace. Let me say that one more time. I think this is important. You do have the right to be honest or blunt in your conversations, but you have an obligation to be kind and to be filled with grace. Guys, this is a beautiful cycle, right? It sort of reminds me of the concept of the system of credits and debits, right? In relationships, when we invest in someone, when we speak positively, when we affirm them, we show gratitude, when we give them a pat on the back, we are investing in that relationship. We are crediting our social capital account. And then when the hard conversation comes, that's a debit. We have to sit down, have a heart-to-heart, talk about behavior, talk about some really challenging, behavioral thing, we have to withdraw from that relationship. So everything I just said is to give you a system of credits. If you're constantly seasoning your conversations with grace, you're building into your child, then when those tough conversations come, because you know they will, it's just going to be a lot easier. And they're going to know that their relationship is resting on a bedrock that is solid, that mom and dad loves me no matter what, and that when they do have that tough conversation, things are a lot easier. So by practicing these principles, you earn the right to be heard by your child. And if your child is still living under your roof, they have to hear what you have to say, but one day they're going to move out and live in a city far away. And you still, at that moment, you still want to be heard. You still want to have the right to be heard by them. And I'm convinced that if you practice these principles, you will definitely do that. So that's all, but what would happen? Here's my final question. What would happen if you put these 7 principles into practice? Some of them may sound crazy, some of them may sound extreme, but I would challenge you to put into practice as many of these as you can. Some of you guys, there, for whatever reason, could be a toxic communication culture in your home that will not be fixed overnight. But I do believe that it can heal over time and things can be different. Things can be better a year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. So there are my thoughts on that. Great. All right, guys, next video up, we are going to hear from Greg and Lynn McDonald. Greg and Lynn are 2 friends of mine here in Atlanta. They founded an organization, a ministry called Embracing the Journey. I met Greg and Lynn after a talk I gave several months ago, fell in love with both of them. They have a gay son, lives in Atlanta. We've become friends, and I absolutely love this interview. 2 things I want you to watch for. Their humility is stunning. Their humility to kind of own the things that have gone wrong in the past is so inspiring to me. The second thing is I want you to listen for how they interact with their son's gay friends. It's probably the best I've ever seen in any parent I've interacted with, and it's extremely inspiring. So the first part of the video is going to be Greg and Lynn telling some of their story, and then it's going to cut to our interview. I hope you enjoy it.
We're Greg and Lynn McDonald, and we're actually from Michigan. We were high school sweethearts, got married right out of high school. Lynn was 18, I was 20, and that's a long time ago. It was 37 years ago.
I got pregnant, and we had our daughter, and then a couple years later after that, we had our son. And so I always dreamed of having a family. I wanted a boy, a girl, the white picket fence, the dog. I wanted the whole kit and caboodle.
I met with a good friend of mine who's a pastor every Friday for lunch, kind of an accountability relationship. And he had told me he was brokenhearted. He had just found out that his son was accessing pornography on the family computer. And I remember going home and thinking, boy, I got to check out our computer. And sure enough, our son was accessing porn on the computer as well, except it was gay porn. We had dinner with our son, and I had shared with him what I had uncovered. His immediate response was, I've always dreaded this day. He was, crushed with, I don't know if it was embarrassment. It was very difficult for him. It was difficult for us. And every day you'd wake up, and that's if you could sleep. And when you woke up, you felt like you're living this horrible dream. And then all of a sudden, the society I lived in took on a whole different look. Now I heard all these gay jokes being told at lunch, and I saw TV differently, and it was very almost surreal to go through those days.
There were a lot of questions that came to mind, questioning myself as a mother, questioning my husband as a father. Are we going to lose our friends? Are we going to be able to attend the same church that we've been attending? I was frightened. I was frightened that if I chose to love my son, does that mean that I'm going to have to abandon God because of just how I was raised, very conservatively, and how verses of the Bible were taught to me? I was more concerned about myself than I was even my child.
Early on, our direction to Greg and our first conversation was, though we'll never stop loving you, like we need to get you fixed. So starting with ourselves, the messages that we were enforcing were pretty negative for the relationship. So when Greg went off to school, it actually took the tension way down. We continued to stay really close to Greg, even when he was in New York or Chicago. You know, we'd travel frequently to go see him. Made it a point to not only hang out with him, but with his friends. I actually think it was those times where the relationship really started to take hold again. You know, we became friends with literally dozens of gay folks around. Now they're around the country because they've grown up and they've got jobs and they're all over the place. But I would routinely ask a lot of the same questions. You know, it's like, when did you decide to be gay? And I've never had anybody explain, oh, well, that was on such and such a date. They all say, are you crazy? Like, who would ever pick this lifestyle? And asking them, you know, what are the greatest hurts? And always, it's either family members, you know, a mom saying, get out of my house, I never want to see you again. Or in most cases, it's the church, which is a huge ache for us, you know, because we're concerned about their souls, and here they've been, you know, pushed away. I think we reached a point with our relationship with Greg where we felt comfortable enough and confident enough where I was totally fine strapping a bullseye on my chest and saying, have at it.
And so I think that was a turning point for me. That was a turning point that, okay, it's not the life that I wanted, and you know, when I first got married, but that God was in it, and that God was orchestrating this, and it was going to be okay.
You know, today we're not interested in trying to change people. We're just interested in trying to love them. And early on, that wasn't necessarily the case. I'd say today we're really attempting to be focused on loving the people God puts in our path. So whether it's, you know, a gay man in Chicago who's being prepped for back surgery. He'd been kicked out of his house, and he calls us and says, would you pray with me? If you don't have a relationship, you don't have to worry about having those opportunities. If you have a relationship, then you have these incredible opportunities to speak truth into people's life. It's a lot freer for us. And again, as life happens, we find that we become sure footing for somebody who's in the midst of a trial.
Greg and Lynn, it is so good to have you guys with me today. How are you doing?
Great.
Doing really good.
Awesome. Well, I know we met several months back, and I've been to your home, and we've got to know each other a little bit over the last few months. And I'm just so inspired with your story, with your heart, with your attitude. Just the way you approach this conversation has been really inspiring to me. So let me start by just saying thank you for that. So tell me a little bit more. I know we've seen the video, but tell me a little bit more about your family. Where did you guys grow up? And just tell me more about kind of how the McDonalds grew up.
Sure. So we're from the great state of Michigan. For people that don't know that, everybody when they're from Michigan, they say Michigan, right? So anyways, long and short is we're both born and raised in the Detroit area, the east side of the state. But we both we spent 30 some years on the west side of the state, and then later up in northern Michigan as well. So our whole lives were basically spent in Michigan, and that's where we raised our kids. That's where we both came to know about Jesus. And today we reside in Atlanta. So actually today, both of our children and their families, everybody is all here in Atlanta. So Atlanta is our new home today, which our 3 grandkids are here. So that's a blast as well.
Great. So your son, Greg Jr., came out to you about how many years ago has it been?
It's been 16 years.
Yeah, 16, 17 years ago.
17 years now.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I know you guys you've had a lot of time to process. You know, some people watching this, they may have had a child come out to them a month ago. Some have maybe more than that. But, you know, I know you guys have changed so much of that process, and you have grown and taken leaps forward in kind of how you approach this. What do you feel like has sparked some of that change and growth?
Well, I think a lot of it was just about entering into that journey, and pursuing God at the same time of trying to understand and pursue our son. And I think what really was a pivotal point for both of us when we started reading the Bible, and there's a passage there that in Matthew, I think it was Matthew 22 verses 36 through 40, and it's where Jesus is asked what the greatest commandment is, and he says to love God and to love others. He goes on to say all the law and all the prophets stem from that. And once we heard that was the number one commandment, was to love God and love others, it gave us the freedom of being able to love freely without feeling like you were condoning any behaviors or judging. We just loved. We just chose to love.
And I'd say to put a little more flesh on that, in that context, when Jesus is asked what's the greatest commandment, after he calls all that out, as Lynn just said, when he says that all the laws, all the prophets hang on these two commands. So at the time, the Jews were trying to keep about 630 laws. Okay, so we think laws, I think 10 commandments, right? At the time, the Jews were trying to keep 630 laws. He says of all those, he says these are the two most important things, and everything hangs on this. And the way that we view that, it's like there's a 100-question exam. Get these two questions right, you pass the exam. Get the other 98 right, miss these two, you flunk.
Yeah.
And so for us, that really kind of became our call to action. There's so many things that are clear and there's so many things that are unclear in the Bible, right? Some things are even meant to be a mystery, God says. This is crystal clear. God wants us to love.
That's awesome. I know in the video you talked about, making friends with a lot of gay people, mostly your son's friends, which at the time I think lived in New York or Chicago maybe. But tell me what that's been like, because I feel like that's a pretty unique kind of aspect to you guys' journey, is kind of being a part of that world.
Well, and so what's important to note there too is that what ultimately drove us down that road was our original behavior. So when we found Greg out, he didn't come out, we found him out. If you could do it wrong in terms of how we responded to him, we did. And so, we eventually kind of ran him and his friends off. They stopped coming around. And it became clear to us that we had lost voice in his life. We had lost influence. And that's about the same time this whole idea about pursuing Greg without an agenda of changing him, without an agenda of trying to play the Holy Spirit, right? Like we stopped trying to convict him. We became very focused on loving him. And that meant his friends as well. So that's kind of going into it. What we found was we came across fabulous people. The people that were his friends, the people that we've met in the LGBT community, they're fabulous people. Most of them are pretty witty, pretty fun to be with. It's been a real blessing to us. Something that we talk about a lot is that once you've heard somebody's story, it's hard not to love them. In fact, we'd tell you it's impossible not to love somebody once you've heard their story. And so for us, entering into their lives made that really easy.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, one of my favorite parts of the video is whenever you were sort of recounting the story of asking some of your son's friends, so when did you decide to be gay? And I love your humility in sort of admitting, the silliness of that question now looking back. But, I'm curious, what other sort of those original beliefs do you think you had that maybe were false or rooted in some bad assumptions?
Sure. So, when we learned about Greg, I would say we both had an impression that everybody in the LGBT community was very promiscuous. We see television reporting from gay pride parades, right? And they're normally pretty extreme. And so we somehow in our minds were thinking that that's how all these people are, right? And the kind of the godlessness that oftentimes is portrayed, and certainly some of that is there. It's there in the heterosexual community as well, right?
Right.
And but what we've found were many of those beliefs that we had were disproven. We know dozens and dozens of folks that identify as being LGBTQ that are sold out for Jesus, much more so than many straight people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was a surprise. We know numerous folks that are gay that have really taken their sexuality serious to the point where they didn't want to live together before they were married, right? Things that we seldom see in the heterosexual community. And for us, leaning into our journey was a big deal for us. It's become a big part of our life. 4 years ago, Lynn was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that's actually where the name of our ministry came from, Embracing the Journey. Kind of came as an offshoot of that because, we learned that, with breast cancer, especially aggressive breast cancer, it's not something you mess around with. You got to lean into it and you tackle it. And we've learned the same thing in our walk with our son, that by leaning into it, great things come from it.
Mm-hmm. Healing.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Lynn, you said, I think your quote was, "It's not the life I wanted, but we learned that God was in it and that God was orchestrating this and that it was going to be okay." I love that perspective. I'm curious, how long did it take you to get to that point of having that revelation that God had a plan sort of in this whole story beyond just the initial fear and worry that you had a gay child?
Honestly, it took me several years. And I think a lot of it was because, this was back in 2001, right around there.
Yep.
So there weren't a lot of materials out there. There weren't videos like you are making right now where people share their stories. And so I think it took me longer to heal and to embrace that because I struggled with how I can follow God and still love my child through this. And it wasn't being talked about in the churches at that time, or if it was, it was, that you're not supposed to associate with them. And I was trying to work that out in my mind. And so, I think as time went on and as I began to pray and, read more books and read the Bible, God just revealed to me, number one, again, going back to loving Him, loving God, and loving others. And that's where I fall back on, is how I moved forward, is allowing, I guess it was where Jesus, allowed me the freedom to do both, to love Him and to love my son. Because He said, love your neighbor, how much more your son? Right. So it was like, we're even called to love our enemies. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if we're called to love our enemies, how much more my son or daughter who is gay or LGBTQ,
Lynn, that point about, we're called to love our enemy, how much more should we love our own son, is so profound and so true. Thank you for sharing that. I love the story you told of the guy in Chicago who was having, I think, back surgery. And he called you to ask for you to pray for him for that back surgery. And you talked about how that was sort of evidence of the level of trust and relationship that you had built with that particular man. Tell us more about that or other experiences with kind of that.
So when Paul called us, he had shared that his mom, when she found out that he was gay, that she basically kicked him out of the house. Now, he was probably right around 17, 18 at the time. And she kicked him out of the house, and she said something really sort of horrific. She said, "I wish you were never born." And that hurt him to the core. And so seeing us build up trust in his life and having him come to us and ask us to pray for him while he has back surgery was just so heartwarming to see that God provided another adult in his life to love on him, a mom and a dad figure. What's exciting about the story is just a couple years ago, so now he's probably right around 30. I was asking him, I said, Paul, so what is your relationship like with your mom now? He said, wonderful story, great story to tell you. My mom and I just reconciled. I said, what did that look like? And he said, well, she apologized for all the hurtful things that she said to me, especially the part where she said, I wish you were never born. She said, I wish I could take that back, but I can't. But he forgave her, and now they're on their healing path of trying to figure out and enter in each other's lives and start anew.
Guys, this has been such a fun conversation. What final thoughts would you leave for a parent who's watching who is where you were, 5 or 10 years ago?
What comes to my mind, Brett, is Lynn alluded to it a little bit ago, and that is that the learnings that have come by us having a son who's gay have been nothing short of miraculous in terms of how God used those to help shape us. And so specifically, there were things about our life, both of us, that were certainly anything but Christ-like, that I'm not sure how we would have been able to change, how we would have been able to move away from some unhealthy behaviors without God bringing our son into our life who's gay. The idea that it's not some cosmic accident that we're Greg's son or Greg's parents, right? I mean, God uniquely designed us to be his parents. And God uniquely designed Greg, and he's crazy about Greg.
I think I would just want to encourage parents that just because you're in the place of pain and emotional pain, it doesn't mean you're going to stay there forever. In fact, it's the first place you have to enter. But how that you can get to that thriving stage, but it's going to take time. It's going to take some time and processing, and as Greg said, leaning into your experience to get there. And scripture again, this helped me so much. Was I think it's in Romans where it says that your suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. And we always want to skip from the suffering to the hope. But God's formula is that we have to persevere in it. We have to enter in it. We have to look at our own character, of what maybe God might be teaching us to it. And then we can receive the hope. So be encouraged. You're in that. But God gives us a formula to get to the hope and to follow it.
I like to tell people it's like we've been planning this trip to Hawaii. We've been planning it for a long time. We've been saving. We've been reading up on it. We've got all these great plans and ideas about our trip to Hawaii. And the plane takes off, and we're on our way to Hawaii, and the pilot comes on and he says, folks, we've got some problems. We're not going to make it to Hawaii. The good news is we're going to land. We're going to be able to land safely, but we're going to have to land here in Atlanta, right? Well, Atlanta's not Hawaii, but guess what? Atlanta's a great place to live. Mm-hmm. And Atlanta's full of surprises, and it's full of blessings. And it's not a bad place at all. It's not one that we would have picked. We were shooting for Hawaii, but we really love Atlanta.
Wow. I love that. Well, guys, I know you are involved in a lot of things. You spend most of your time working with your nonprofit and ministry called Embracing the Journey. So tell us about that. How can people discover more about the McDonald's and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I'll just give you just a quick commercial on that, Brett. So We've been around now for a couple years. That is where it's been our full-time gig. And what we're all about is simply building bridges between the LGBT community, their families, and the church. We're very intentional about it. We talk about building bridges. Candidly, that's a code for reconciliation. We're in business of reconciling families. Too often, we know way too many young adults that end up being polarized, separated from their family. And so our primary goal is to help draw the LGBT community and their families back together, and then point them both toward the church. When we say the church, we're talking about the big C, that's Christ, primarily because the brick and mortar churches that are down the street that we all participate in, they're all made up of men and women just like us, and we all have our own issues. We're all flawed, and so there are no perfect churches. But so our intent is to point people to Christ. It's been possibly the most exciting thing in our life, that is to see so many families being reconciled, being healed, and to see them grow in their faith. Excuse me. It's interesting to us that so often the things that we ask God to take away from us are the things that He uses to draw us into a deeper relationship with Him, or draw our child into a deeper relationship with Him. And so that's really kind of what the ministry is about. We do one-on-one ministry, coaching, counseling, if you will. That's a big part of what we do. We have an online ministry that you can find at www.embracingthejourney.org. And there's a bunch of resources that help parents kind of navigate these choppy and uncharted waters. I'm a boater, by the way. I love to boat. And if you've ever gone boating, going out in a big body of water without a navigation chart is a risky thing to do. If you're out in uncharted water, as most of us parents are with LGBT kids, it can be a dicey place to be, especially when the waves get rough. And so our intent is to provide tools and resources for parents on their journey.
And I also know you guys have a book coming out. Is that correct?
We do. We're excited about that.
We are excited about that.
Good. Can you give us a 10-second snapshot of what that book's going to be about, if you don't mind?
The best snapshot I can give you is what our son says. So Greg Jr. says the book is about two parents who are chasing the Son, that is their son, while chasing the Son of Christ, the Son of God, Christ. And it's our story. It's a memoir, but it's also, it's got a bunch of real practical applications. Our intent in creating the book was to create a tool for parents, especially those who are kind of in that free fall stage where they've just learned the news, is to provide a little bit of a roadmap for them. And Simon & Schuster is going to be publishing it, and right now it's slated for
under Howard Books, which is their Christian, I guess, house.
Yeah. So first quarter of 19, that'll be on the shelves, if not before.
Guys, this has been awesome. Hear me say I'm so super thankful for you guys, for what you're doing, what you've done, just for your spirit, and just sort of the amount of grace that you bring to this conversation has certainly inspired me. So thank you guys so much.
We're thankful for you, Brett, and all that you're doing.
That was awesome. What I love about the McDonald story is how they have engaged with the LGBT community. What I love about that is it gives you a broader perspective of what that's about, and it also can demystify that world. If you're like me and you grew up in a more conservative tradition, that's a very scary world as far as the different perceptions and misconceptions that we have about it. But when you actually get to know people in it, it drains out the fear and frees you up to love your child and love them better. What would it look like if we loved so well, not just our kids, but even their LGBT friends, where they were calling us asking for prayer? To me, that would make a huge difference. So next, I'm going to be talking about what may be one of the most challenging parts of having an LGBT child. A lot of parents told me in that early questionnaire, hey, Brett, my frustration is not with my child. My frustration is with fill in the blank, the people at my church, my coworkers, the people in my small community, whatever it could be. I know that this plays a massive role in how you navigate this. and I think there's some things we can do to navigate it even better. I want to start off with a verse I have always loved here. When I was in high school, I remember thinking about what I call the fear of man, right? When you're in high school, you're constantly worried about what other people think of you. And I found this verse in high school, Proverbs 29:25. Listen to this. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. What's a snare? A snare is a trap, right? I mean, literally picture a trap door in the floor. When you worry about what other people think, it is like you're falling into a dark pit. It's literally like falling into a pit. And on the counter of that, whoever trusts in God is kept safe from that trap. That's the antidote, is trusting in God. Maximizing God's opinion, minimizing the opinions of others is the name of the game when it comes to this issue. Here is why this is a big deal. I know that you feel this, of course, yourself, but it's also a big deal because this is probably a really big deal to your child as well. Listen, your kid is very aware, kids are smart, very aware of your social status, of your standing in the community, of your standing in the church. And I can remember, guys, years and years ago, I can remember just staying up late at night thinking, you know what, if I come out, if people know this secret of mine, that's going to wreck my parents. That's going to hurt them. That's going to damage their reputation. Kids are aware of this, and it is extremely, extremely scary. It's one of the most stressful parts, sort of navigating this when you're younger, is the feeling like you're going to hurt your family, which is obviously not a good feeling to have. So what I want to talk about now is I want to give you 5 strategies to dealing with this stress, to dealing with the thoughts and opinions of those who won't or don't understand. I'm going to talk some about sort of those closer to you, maybe some immediate family members who are not out. I know a lot of people watching this. There's a high level of secrecy right now where your child is not out and you're essentially in the closet on behalf of your child. That can be very stressful. But I'm also going to kind of expand it to sort of those people, you know, the group of people out there whose opinions we worry about and that we care about, whether we want to admit it or not. Before I jump into these 5 points, I want to give this caveat, guys. This is mostly mindset stuff, meaning to really address this issue, there's not a lot we can do to go out and, you know, from physically, you know, putting our hand over someone's mouth. We can't stop people from talking. We can't stop people from having really tough opinions. So when we come to a situation like that, we've got to go up here and we've got to begin to think through what mindsets are we bringing into this situation that are making it worse. So a lot of this is around mindset. All right, number 1 strategy for dealing with friends and family. This is a mindset one, and it relates to your child. Number 1, make sure your child knows they are first chair. Okay, first chair is in quotes. Make sure your child knows they are first chair. This is sort of a band metaphor. So here's the definition of first chair. The premier musician playing a particular instrument in an orchestra, taking the lead for that instrument's movements, and playing solos. That's the first chair. So I want you to imagine this huge room filled with a band, filled with an orchestra, with hundreds of people in it. They've all got their instrument in their hands. And out of that room, your child needs to feel like they're the first chair. They're the one in the spotlight. They're the one kind of receiving the primary attention. They're thriving. Their well-being comes second to everyone else. That's very important. So my question is, does your child know that? I guarantee a lot of you guys probably assume they do. You've probably told your child that, but I would just wonder, do they actually know that they are first chair and that whatever Uncle Bob or Aunt Sally or Pastor Joe thinks, that ultimately you've got their back first and foremost? I think it is very, very important for kids to understand that. They need to see you as their defender, right? Now, I'm not a parent. I suspect this is probably in the parental instinct. But they need to kind of see you defending them against a hostile world. Again, there's a lot of hostile entities out there. For some, the church is hostile. Friends, family, the culture at large. They need to feel like you are on their side first and foremost, and that of all the chairs in the world, they are your first chair. So make sure your child knows they are first chair. Point number 2, here we go. Identify your first team. So we talk about first chair. This one is about identifying your first team. There's an author that a lot of you guys are familiar with. Her name is Brené Brown. And Brené's written a lot of books about vulnerability and about sort of navigating a really challenging world. She recommended this one time. She says, you know what? Get a 1-inch piece of paper, a tiny little square, 1 inch by 1 inch. Get a pen, and I want you to write down as many names of the most important people in your life on that sheet of paper. And she said, once you do that, she said, she didn't use the terminology first team, but that is your first team, right? These are the people in your life that matter the most. And what she talks about with that is once you know who that first team is, it frees you up to not have to look out into the world for validation and for, hoping and praying that people, like you or don't say bad things about your back. Guys, this was my number one sort of mindset when I began Blue Babies Pink, and I know I kicked off an entire sort of train wreck of gossip back where I grew up. When I laid down at night, I took peace in the fact of, Brett, God's on your side, and who's your first team? And I thought of the people that were most important to me. I thought of those people in my community. And if they trust me and they love me and they respect me, that's enough. And I'm not scanning the horizon for additional sort of validation. So when you make that list of your first team, you're giving yourself the freedom to stop caring what these ancillary people think. Rehearsing not caring, I think, is a really big deal. So write down that list, identify who your first team is, and then when you are besieged with thoughts of what will so-and-so think, just remind yourself, how's our first team doing? Now, understand there that on your first team, there may be people that are still challenging, but at least with that knowledge, you're able to sort of not focus on the people further out. Number 3, here we go. Make peace with the gossip. Make peace with the gossip. Guys, the answer is yes. People are going to gossip. Many of you have already been gossiped about in your town, in your church. The issue of sexuality is just too juicy. Humans cannot resist talking about this if there are rumors of someone being gay, et cetera, et cetera. But here's my question. So what? So what if there is gossip? It's just words. And I know that may be an oversimplification, but it's just words. There's an old adage that I've heard. What people say about you behind your back is none of your business. What people say about us behind our backs is none of our business. And so again, that may feel like an oversimplification, but I think there's just an art to just sort of accepting, gossip is a thing. It's not going to go away. I have zero control over it. I'm going to mentally let that go. I'm going to set that down. And on the reverse, what I would love for you to kind of replace that emotional energy with is what we see in James 1:2. Listen to this. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. If you haven't figured it out yet, you have been given the greatest character building and perseverance building dilemma or situation, whatever you want to call it, imaginable, right? And when this kind of gossip thing happens, that's just a great example or great opportunity to, in Paul's words, consider it joy in your mind instead of cowering down to the fear of that. You know what? Lean into it and say, it's okay. It's joyful that I am having to go through these trials. It's very counterintuitive. That doesn't feel that way often. But I am a big believer of letting go of things we can't control. And when we do that, it builds resilience. Guys, I cannot tell you how much growth I've had in this area. When I look back over my years of being so gripped by fear of what other people will think or say. And when you get into this little practice of considering it pure joy, of reframing struggle as adventure or struggle as a perseverance building activity, it changes everything. And it's a really, really beautiful thing. So number 3, make peace with the gossip. Number 4, here we go. Fight fire with grace. Fight fire with grace. Guys, we have a million reasons to be angry. You do, I do. We can be angry again at our friends, at our church, at the culture at large. We can be angry about how our kids are treated. We can be angry about the way people are treating us. But I'm just a big believer that when that fire comes in, the response is not more fire, more anger, more bitterness. I am convinced that the antidote of that fire is to meet that with great and abundant grace. One of the most profound verses in all the Bible, Philippians 2:3. Here it is. consider others better than yourself. Consider others better than yourself. This is crazy. This feels incredibly backwards, right? As broken, sinful people, our nature is to put ourselves first. But I think there's an art to putting others first. And even in this situation where others wish us harm, in our mind, sort of rehearsing the dignity of people made in God's image, even the really nasty ones, even the really negative people. And if you fixate on what other people say about you, if you fixate on all this negativity, it's going to absolutely kill you. And sadly, I've seen a lot of people, LGBT folks and parents in general, who have gone down this road of constantly being in a defensive posture, constantly being upset, angry, voicing, talking about how terrible things are. And I'm just a big believer that you've got to guard your heart, which is an old biblical principle most of us learned in youth group. We've got to guard our hearts against this kind of fire, against this negativity, and we've got to lead with grace and lead with love. What I love about this is that your child is watching. And one of the great temptations for LGBT folks is to be consumed with bitterness at all of the hardship, all the persecution, all the negativity. And to me, that's the dangerous thing. That's way more dangerous, in my opinion, than their sexuality, is having your soul consumed with bitterness and anger. And so your kid needs to see this modeled by you. Right? They need to see you leading with incredible grace and incredible love. And as bad as it gets, we've got to even ratchet up more grace and more love. Cool. Number 5, last point. Sever toxic friendships, add new healthy ones. Sever toxic friendships and add new healthy ones. This is just a reminder, hopefully you know this, it is okay to remove people from your life. It is okay to remove people out of the orbit of your family's life, of your child's life. I had a mentor tell me once, he had a sort of a broken relationship with his sister. They were in their 50s, and he had not talked to her in years. And he was telling me about this toxic relationship, and he said, I don't talk to her. And I said, well, isn't that unchristian? Shouldn't you mend this relationship? And he said, Brett, here's the deal. He said, I have just taken the microphone away from her. He said, I still love my sister. He said, I would be there for her tomorrow if she called me, but she no longer has the right to speak toxicity and negativity into my life. He said, I took the microphone away, and she no longer has that right. So maybe it's just sort of an emotional moving on from someone, or maybe it's literally pushing someone out of again, your social orbit. Maybe it's unfriending someone on Facebook. I'm just a big believer that's okay. If they're chronically negative, I think we can give them the boot. It's possible to love someone, but to not have to hear and be privy to their negativity. So on the counter of that, if we can sever some bad relationships, I think we need to add new healthy ones. You might need to reformat your community. Maybe there are people that you need to find to bring into your child's life who are just generally more positive, and just get your place in a healthier spot if the community that your child has been in has not been really positive. So that's it. 5 strategies. There's many, many more, but 5 strategies to get you on a healthier path in dealing with people who don't or won't understand. All right, guys, we've got another video interview, another one of my favorites. This is an interview with my friend, Amy Blakeslee. Amy lives here in Atlanta. I'm going to introduce her on the video, so I won't tell you any more, but she has a very interesting story, and I think you're going to love it. Check out this interview. Today, I'm going to talk with Amy Blakeslee. Amy lives in Atlanta, Georgia. For years, she has worked and supported parents of LGBT kids all over the metro Atlanta area. She has incredible insights, incredible wisdom, and incredible grace. So, Amy, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really glad to have you. We've been friends, I guess, for, maybe a year now. And I know your story, but the folks watching might not know it. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's great to be a part of what you're doing. My name's Amy, and I am a pastor at a local church here in the area, and I kind of identify myself as a gay Christian, so I can kind of unpack that a little bit, but grew up in a very loving Christian home, grew up going to church, had a great experience as far as church goes. We went virtually every time the doors were open. I prayed to receive Jesus as my Lord and Savior when I was 5 years old, so that happened for me at a very early age. And then I was baptized at the age of 16. but kind of realized I was attracted to girls in middle school, and coming from my just framework of how I was raised, that was not okay. And so that happened in middle school, but even prior to that, I also experienced some gender issues really early, probably around preschool. And so, just went through the experience of going to bed at night and saying this prayer where I would ask God to fix his mistake and kind of turn me into a boy while I was sleeping at night. And then I would wake up in the morning and just be just so disappointed that he didn't answer that prayer. So I did experience a lot of gender issues in my childhood, as well as then in middle school, realizing that I was attracted to girls when, in my mind, I should have been attracted to boys. So because of how I was raised, it was very easy for me to go into denial and kind of just stuff those experiences down and kind of just act like they weren't there. And that worked for me for a long time. I say worked for me because denial obviously is not a healthy thing to do, but I made it work for me for about 20 years. Just got married to a man, and we went on to have 3 kids. But just over the years, that living in denial became more and more unhealthy and just unsustainable. So started coming out to a few of my close friends in my 30s, and that just began a process of me getting more and more authentic about this part of my life.
And this is while you're married and already have 3 kids.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. So it eventually involved coming out to my husband. And it's just been a continuous journey of us kind of figuring this out together. But I am very upfront when I do tell my story to make sure that people understand that I don't view my story as prescriptive for anybody else. This is just my story, and I'm the first person to say, yeah, I have just a weird, wonky, very unconventional story. Yeah. So that's kind of my context of just with the ministry I do and coming into this conversation as a gay Christian. And the reason I use the verbiage kind of gay Christian when it's appropriate, one of the main reasons is just because back in the day when I was coming to terms with this, I would say I struggle with same-sex attraction. And I know many people still use that verbiage, or they will say, I'm same-sex attracted. For me personally, it just became very burdensome to have to use the word struggle every time I had to identify myself in this area. I think it just wore on me psychologically. So at some point, I just decided, I'm going to use the verbiage gay Christian, not intending to communicate any assumed behavior or anything like that, but just a simpler way to say I'm same-sex attracted. Yeah. So that's kind of how I identify today.
Cool.
And obviously a little bit gender nonconforming. I did come to peace with my gender, but I kind of, feel really comfortable in more of a masculine presentation of my gender. And that's just been another journey of allowing myself the freedom to do that.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing. I know you've worked with parents of LGBT kids for years now, right? In the ministry.
Yeah.
And kind of essentially led a community of parents that are working through that and learning to love their kids and struggling through theology and questions around faith. So what has that been like? What have you learned sort of in that community with those parents?
I've learned a lot. So I'll just back up and, it's about 4 or 5 years ago, I started this ministry, this environment called Parent Connect. And it started with literally one couple contacting our church because their son had just come out to them. And they had nowhere to turn, so they contacted the church. So I went online and I Googled, support for parents of LGBT kids. And I found one support group in the metro area that we live in, which was unbelievable to me that there was just one. So that's when God really put it on my heart to start a ministry for parents of LGBT kids, and specifically for Christian parents, because it can be a very isolating environment if you're a Christian parent of an LGBT child. So that's how this ministry started. And really the mission of Parent Connect is just to lead parents of LGBT kids in a growing relationship with Jesus Christ by providing a safe environment where they can experience community and personal growth for themselves. And we really just focus on 2 goals in Parent Connect, and that is to help parents discover God's purposes for them on this journey, because believe it or not, it's not all about the kids. God actually has something in mind for the parents as well. And to really just encourage and equip the parents to love their LGBT child well. And what does that look like within that context? So that's kind of how Parent Connect started. And gosh, I mean, what I've learned from the parents is they're just amazing people, trying to navigate something that they never thought was going to be a part of their story, and figuring out, is this even possible to navigate this journey? And hopefully, you know, especially in Parent Connect, to show them, yes, this is absolutely possible. And there's a lot of purpose in this for them as parents as well.
Yeah, what I love about the ministry you're leading in your community is that you've been very clear, hey, we are open for both gay-affirming parents and then those of the more kind of traditional understanding of Scripture. Talk about that. You know, has that been a challenge, kind of having those two groups, you know, communicating to both and loving both well? What's that been like?
Honestly, it has not been an issue at all. You know, we are very clear in Parent Connect that it is going to be a safe environment for any parent, no matter what theology they hold. So one of the main responsibilities that Parent Connect leaders have, these group leaders, is to maintain a safe environment for any parent. So we're very clear that, you know, yes, we talk about theology, but the main focus is to help parents, no matter what their theology is, to make sure that their theology is moving them towards a growing, healthy, loving relationship with their child. So even in Parent Connect, we have parents who are, you know, have a more traditional view of sexuality and gender, and then we have parents who have an affirming theology. And honestly, we have everything in between, and we have parents who would say, I really don't know, you know, what my theology is on this at this time, and we just give them a space to work that out, and I think parents really appreciate that.
I love that. So as you've been working with this group of parents, you know, I'm sure you hear a lot of recurring themes, you know, parents struggling with the same thing. What are some of those challenges that you see as you're leading people through that process of understanding their child better?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot for parents to process once they start this journey. One of the big ones is, especially initially when their child comes out, parents have a really hard time envisioning any kind of hopeful future for their child, because I think that protectiveness comes out, and the first thing parents usually think of is the bigotry, the persecution, just the general unloving attitudes that people can have towards the LGBT community. So they don't want those things to happen to their child. And then just thinking about future marriage and kids, you know, it can just look very bleak, you know, from the parent standpoint for their child. So in Parent Connect, hopefully we kind of take them on this journey where they can realize, yes, their child has a very hopeful, purposeful future, not based on their sexuality or gender or whether or not they're in a relationship, but based solely on the love and grace of God. So that's a big thing for parents. I would say another one is it's kind of starts this journey of parents having to go on this theological journey of reconciling the fact that they have an LGBT child with typically what a lot of them have been taught in their youth regarding homosexuality. And, you know, generally where parents kind of find themselves is feeling like they have to choose. And that is an awful place for parents to live, to feel like, okay, I either have to choose God and be faithful to Him and reject my child, or I have to turn my back on my faith in order to embrace my child. And nobody wants to live there. That is a miserable place to be. And thankfully, you know, in Parent Connect, we help parents realize that's not a choice you have to make. You can do both. And that's very liberating and freeing, but it takes parents a while to navigate that based on their past or what they may have been taught. So those are two big themes that I see with most parents.
Yeah, you kind of referenced that, but I've heard you talk about before sort of the idea of loving versus endorsing or supporting and loving.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Loving versus loving and condoning. So what I see with parents a lot of the times is this belief that, hey, if I love my LGBT child, then that means I am somehow condoning their choices, their behavior, their relationship. And I think that is, it's a natural thing for them to do, but I think if you really pare that down, it's based in a false belief, in a lie that I am responsible for my child's choices and behavior. And especially if your child is an adult, this just breaks down, because the truth is we are not responsible for our adult children's choices and behavior. That is a parent taking responsibility for really something that's not on their plate. So really then the question becomes, okay, as a parent, what am I responsible for? And, in Parent Connect, hopefully we help them see, I believe you are responsible to pursue relationship and maintain influence as much as possible, and take steps towards your child and not away from them. So yeah, the loving equals condoning piece is a big thing for parents to work through, and just giving themselves the freedom to realize I can love my LGBT child, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I am agreeing with everything that they're doing or their relationship or whatever it could be for that particular situation.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard recently that good theology should cause us to draw closer to people, not pull away, and I feel like that's such a true principle kind of in this thing. Everyone I'm talking to, sort of as I've been on this journey of talking to parents all across the nation, everyone seems to be struggling with communication, of how do we talk about this from parent to child. It's a very touchy topic. I've even observed this with my relationship with my mom, is sometimes I don't know how to bring it up. She doesn't know how to bring it up. It's sometimes an awkward thing to talk about. So what are some tips that you have, or maybe some principles you've seen to open up the lines of communication between the parent and the child?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, it's gonna be different for each family, but I know especially with initially after the child comes out, parents sometimes don't react the best in that situation, understandably so. So part of the communication, a big part of the communication, is going to involve the parents apologizing. Because a lot of times, from the child's perspective, it's not a safe place. It's not a safe conversation. So I have parents in Parent Connect who have had to go back and apologize and say, hey, we're really sorry for how we reacted when you came out or when we found you out. I've also had parents apologize for things they did and said even before they knew their child was LGBT. And then now that they have this knowledge, they're thinking back, to all these comments that they may have made. And so they'll go back and say, hey, I'm so sorry that, back, 5 years before you came out that, I said this. And then we've had some parents that have actually pre-apologized. They'll go to their child and say, hey, we are 100% committed to walking this journey with you, but we know we're going to mess up. So we just want to pre-apologize and ask for your forgiveness now and know that our heart is for you and that our heart is good. And that has gone a long way just to make the environment as safe as possible for the kids to take steps toward their parents. So apologizing is a huge thing, like from the parents' control, that they could do for their child that will open up the communication even more.
Yeah. So what would you say to the parent who maybe has a more traditional understanding of Scripture? They believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. What would you say to those parents if their child is not on the same page with that? What's your advice for them?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, they are not alone. Most of the parents I work with do come from they hold a traditional sexual ethic. So they're definitely not alone. But I would want to take them on a journey of understanding that they don't have to change their theology or compromise their theology in order to love their child well. And I think it does go back to that loving equals condoning concept that we just talked about, of kind of cutting that tie. And it really gives parents the freedom to be able to love their child in tangible ways that their child can receive without the parent feeling like they are leaving what they believe. So that's really the biggest thing, is just cutting that cord between loving and condoning, and just allowing parents to have that freedom to love their child.
That's awesome. So theology around this topic can get very volatile, obviously very quickly. How do you approach that with parents? Because again, I've observed there's so much emotion on both sides that I think sometimes that emotion certainly clouds our conversation, and I think it also can cloud how we think about it. But how do you begin to talk about that?
So like I said before, we do talk about theology in our Parent Connect groups. It is always within the context of how is your theology moving you towards ministry in your child's life. So it's always within the context of ministry. So that really frees it up. It doesn't really matter what theology a parent holds as far as the conversation, because the end result is going to be, no matter what theological ethic you hold, it should be moving you towards influence and relationship with your child. So kind of how we unpack that when we do talk about theology and Parent Connect, we talk about that concept as far as ministry. We also talk about differentiating between absolutes in the Christian faith versus convictions and preferences. And there's been a lot of recent talk about this. There's a lot of disagreement. But in Parent Connect, it's important. It's an important differentiation because I believe there are absolutes in the Christian faith. One for me would be that Jesus is the perfect Son of God. So in the church, if we have people who don't agree on that, it's going to be really hard to have fellowship and communion if we don't hold that same absolute. Yeah. Versus a conviction or a preference. Baptism by immersion might be a conviction that I have, but I'm not going to break fellowship with a believer if they have a different interpretation of Scripture on that, because it's not an absolute. So for parents to kind of think about how they think about their theology, is this an absolute in my mind, a non-negotiable, or is this something that I can extend grace to other people? So we kind of, find unity in the absolutes, and we extend grace with the convictions and the preferences. So that's been a helpful conversation when we come to theology. Yeah. With that, yeah, that's for sure.
Awesome. I know you've worked with a lot of parents of trans kids. And gender dysphoria is something that you experience to some degree and that you understand. What have you learned talking to those parents? Because I know they're on a very different journey from other parents.
Yeah, well, first I've learned that they are amazing people, amazing families, amazing parents. Our pastor recently said, the further out you are from a situation or a challenge, the easier the solution looks. But then as you get closer to the challenge or the situation, you quickly realize, the solution is much more complex. And I have definitely found that to be true working with families of transgender and gender nonconforming kids, where it is a very complex situation. But yeah, gender dysphoria is basically a sense of distress that kids can feel related to their experience with their gender. And it can range from mild all the way to severe, in some cases causing children to become suicidal. So it's a serious thing. So, for the parents, I really encourage them to focus on helping their child lower their distress. If they are experiencing this dysphoria, this distress, what steps can you take to help the child lower that? Just to more focus on the overall health and well-being of the child, and kind of get the dysphoria under control. And that's going to look different for different families as far as the specific steps that they have to take, to help their child do that.
As I've been talking to parents, one of the words that I keep hearing repeated is the word regret. I've always said when a parent comes out to it, or child comes out to a parent, it's an ambush. Parent's not prepared. They've probably never been taught a lesson on how to react to a child coming out. And so sometimes things are said that they would like to take back. And a lot of parents kind of regret that initial reaction. What would you say to that parent who just has a sense of regret around that first conversation?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that nothing is beyond repair. And I have seen that play out in the families that are involved in Parent Connect, where I have certain couples that would now say, looking back, we did absolutely everything wrong. Like, you name it, we did it. We took away their phone, we grounded them, we, whatever it is, kicked them out of the house. And yet now today, years later, they have a growing, healthy relationship with their child. So I would say nothing is beyond repair. However, it does take time to mend that. And so it is a process of earning back your child's trust. And I have seen that happen, but it does take time for the child to regain trust in the parent and feel like it's a safe place for them to be. But it's very hopeful. I don't think anything is beyond repair.
Yeah. In the same vein of parents talking about regret, there's also tons of stories of parents who have moved beyond that, and they've grown, and God's taken them on this journey of understanding and loving their child, and they're really positive stories. I know you work with some parents like that who are in some ways thriving right now. The relationship with their child is healthy. They've mended kind of those broken bridges. With those parents you've worked with, what are the things that you've seen them do to facilitate that process?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if there's a right way to do it, but they're doing it well. I would say they kind of realize that they are the brightest expression of Christ in their child's life. And so once parents kind of get that, that's kind of a huge responsibility to, I am the biggest reflection of Jesus that my child is going to see. So how do you reflect Christ well? So I think it's just parents who are leading out with unconditional grace and love. Parents who are what I call exhibiting tough love, which I kind of love the definition of, tough love is love that is tough for the parent to give, but not tough for the child to receive. So if parents are giving a love that it might be tough for them to give, but for their child, it's going to be so healing and just a beautiful reflection of Christ. Parents that are leading out with unconditional love and grace. Parents who are loving and accepting their child's significant other, which I know for a lot of parents is one of the most difficult things to do. When their child wants to have their partner or their boyfriend or girlfriend over for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas, and it's just really hard for them to kind of cross that bridge. So just leading out and loving their significant other means a lot to their child. Yeah. But I think those are just the things I see where it's just a posture of humility, where they say, we don't really know how to navigate this, but we're going to figure it out.
It's really good. Okay, Amy, we're going to have a personal question. You mentioned earlier you are in what I've heard called a mixed orientation marriage. You're in a marriage, you're married still, have 3 children. A lot of people asked me early on in my journey, Brett, why don't just marry a girl, make it work. It's been suggested that, desire will kind of follow a friendship. And early on, I really considered that kind of in my journey and what that could look like. I'm actually aware of other mixed orientation marriages and people that have reached out to me through the Blue Baby Spink process who've, are in happy mixed orientation marriages. What's your perspective? I mean, you're living it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we're kind of like unicorns, so there's not a lot of us out there. But yeah, I mean, it's for parents especially to understand, because I know when I tell this part of my story to parents, a common response from the parents is, well, if this can happen for you, then I'm going to hold out hope for my child, that if you can do it, my child can do it. And I really try to move forward with caution with that hope, just simply because the reality is no matter what path your LGBT child takes, there are going to be challenges and struggles. So if your child is in a same-sex relationship, there's discrimination, there's, the things we mentioned before that are just very difficult to navigate. And that actually might be harder for the parents to watch that happen to their child. But then if a child decides to pursue a mixed orientation marriage or even just date somebody of the opposite sex, that presents a whole nother set of challenges. So in other words, a child's struggles and hardships are not going to go away completely if they marry somebody of the opposite sex. They just change. And it can be an equally as difficult a road. It might be easier for the parent because on the outside everything looks great, but there are definitely challenges. So I would just caution parents who would hold out that hope, just to say that I would encourage parents to encourage their child to pursue God's will for their life, whatever that looks like. And I think presuming that for somebody else can be challenging. It's hard enough for us to know God's will for our own lives. So to try to presume what that is for somebody else, I would just be cautious with that. My husband and I been married 23 years, and we're in it till the grave. We love each other very much. But it is a very unconventional, unique type of relationship. So, but I think just for parents to know it's very uncommon and maybe unlikely that their child would pursue that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Makes a lot of sense. Totally. I've heard you talk about before also the sort of the tension or the idea of a comfort versus a conviction. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, this was just a concept I read about years ago, so I don't take credit for it, but it's been really helpful for the parents in Parent Connect. And it's this idea of the parents need a grid through which to make decisions, practical decisions. Like the one I mentioned before, when their child says, hey, can my boyfriend come over for Thanksgiving dinner? And this might be the first time a parent has had to kind of navigate into making this kind of decision. So how do you make this kind of decision? And especially for parents who hold the more traditional theological view, this can be even more difficult. So the idea of comfort versus conviction is for the parent to ask themselves, okay, am I uncomfortable with this because it's just, or am I having trouble with this situation because it's uncomfortable for me? Or does it actually violate a conviction? And that has just proven to be a really clarifying lens that parents use. And actually, quite often, the answer is, this is just really uncomfortable. Because I think where they land is, in that example, there's nothing morally wrong with having a person over to eat a meal at your house. So if it's an idea of being uncomfortable, then I encourage parents, okay, well, you probably need to push through and go outside your comfort zone. And the old question, what does love require of you, is to invite them over. There will be some scenarios where parents would say, no, that violates a conviction that I currently have. And so, the parents have freedom to go, that's just not something that we can do.
That's great. So there's probably some parents watching right now who are right in the thick of this conversation with their child. Maybe the child just came out, lots of emotion, lots of mixed feelings. What would you say to that parent? What words did you have for them?
Yeah. So, I think what I would say is that this was not a surprise to God. The fact that they were going to have an LGBT child was not a surprise to God at all. He knew this was going to be a part of their journey, and that he is going to equip them. I think he handpicked these parents to be parents of this LGBT child. It's not a coincidence, it's not a mistake, and that God will equip them for the journey. And I think there's just a lot of hope in that. And kind of what I referenced before, I love just pointing to God in how he sent Jesus. I think that paints a beautiful picture of grace, of, God could have, in his perfect theology, condemned us to an eternity without him. And that would have been totally justified. But he chose relationship over theology and sent Jesus to save us. And I just think that is a great example that he gave parents to follow, who would say, well, I have this theology and I feel like it's limiting my ability to love my child. If you look at how God kind of, navigated that with us, it's pretty clear that he elevated a relationship with us over what we deserved. And I think that is what parents of LGBT kids are called to do.
It's really beautiful. Any final thoughts or words for parents watching?
Find support, I think, is just huge. You're not alone. That would be kind of my tagline, is you are definitely not alone. And I know, especially in the church, regrettably, that's probably one of the places where parents can feel most alone. So just for them to know, my goodness, you are so not alone. There are other families navigating this, Christian families navigating this, and I just want them to find each other and to do community together, and to realize there are people like you and I and others who want to walk with them and who want to love them and their kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. Amy, this has been incredible.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for just everything welcome. You've done, everything you're doing, for being a friend to me, and for supporting so many parents.
Yeah, back
Thanks.
at you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Guys, I absolutely loved that interview with Amy Blakeslee. Despite having incredible insights, she is about as lovely and a nice person as you will ever find. Now, one thing I love about Amy's group, she mentioned it in that interview, but her group is very welcoming to both affirming and non-affirming parents, which I think is a really big deal. I want to talk about those two terms for just 1 second, affirming and non-affirming. I am actually making a shift in my language. This actually came from a conversation with my mom, who expressed to me the feeling that the phrase non-affirming was disrespectful, because her point was, Brett, I do affirm you. I affirm that I love you. I will always love you. I affirm and am in your corner. And I thought that was a really good point. So moving forward, I am making a shift in the language that I use. And there may be other people who do content that don't make the shift, which is fine. But the two terms I'm going to use are the term affirming, which means that someone who affirms that God can bless same-sex relationships. And then the other term I'm going to use is the word traditional, meaning those on the traditional side, they affirm the Bible's traditional understanding of human sexuality. I feel like both of those terms honor kind of both sides, and it's just more clear and more honoring. So from here, moving forward, that's going to be sort of the main terminology that we're using here in Harbor. And the reality is, some of you are not, you're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, which I understand as well. The bottom line is we want Harbor to be a welcoming place, no matter where you are in this discussion. As I've said many times, Harbor is primarily practical in how we are loving and helping and supporting our children, and it is not primarily theological. That doesn't mean we never talk about theology. It is okay to talk about that, but we want to stick to the kind of the uniting bond of the fact that Jesus is the center of our theology, and after that, our children are primary. And so I want us to just keep that in mind as we're moving forward. Part of the guidelines in Harbor, I encourage you to check out the community rules over in the About section on Facebook, but respect. We require respect in all interactions, and I have no doubt that you guys will definitely come through on that. All right, how you feeling? Are you still there? We've got one final video, one final segment. The next video that you're about to watch, it's the continuation of a talk I did at a church here in Atlanta before a group of Christian parents of LGBT kids. The video is called 8-Point Gut Check, G.U.T. And that's an acronym. I'll explain that in the video. But I think you're going to enjoy this. It's got some practical stuff peppered in and some more philosophical stuff as well. So here it is, 8-Point Gut Check. Hope you enjoy it. What do I wish for your children? As a random guy who wrote a blog on the internet, and this is it. Regardless of your theology, that you would be the most outrageously gracious, loving example of Jesus that your child ever sees. I think that's your mission at this point, or one of them at least, is that you would be the most outrageously gracious, loving example of Jesus that your child ever sees. So my mom and I have been at this for a couple years now. And sort of the formula that I've seen, I think that we have been practicing, is a little acronym called GUT. Everybody say GUT. There we go, good. And then the next picture will show us what these stands for. Grace, understanding, and trust. And I like this word GUT because so much of this process there's passion involved. There's courage that is required that kind of comes metaphorically from your gut. What I love about these three words is there's two-way streets for both parties, okay? So when it comes to grace, right, we are called to receive and kind of simmer in God's grace and also give grace to the other person lavishly in kind of a forgiving and understanding way. Grace is sort of obviously the heart of the gospel. The only chance any of us have of surviving this tension is a gigantic dose of grace. So I would challenge you to submerge yourself in the doctrine of grace, study it, read commentaries, books, whatever you have to do, simmer in that. The second word is understanding. This one's self-explanatory. I'm going to talk more about later, but this is about empathy. It's about listening. It's about humility. And if were speaking to just your children, I would tell them the same thing. Hey, child, you've got to be on a journey of understanding where your parents are at, right? And realizing that they may not come to the same conclusion as you, and you've got to make peace with that, which is very, very difficult. The third T stands for trust. And this is all about trusting that God has got this. God's got this situation, as much as we might want to change it or push it or influence it. And it's also about trusting that the other person is doing the best they can with the information and wisdom and knowledge that they have. And this was big for me because for so long I ascribed negative motives to my mom. You just don't get it because you don't want to understand, Mom. You just refuse to really pray about this. And I finally had to come to this realization, Brett, give her the grace that she is acting and doing and proceeding in a way the best that she knows based off of how she feels like God is leading her. And on the flip side of that, Mom, you've got to understand that I'm progressing and moving forward in my life in the best way that I know how to honor God, being true to Scripture and true to the power of the Spirit. So I think a myth in the midst of all this that I wanted to address, and maybe you felt, here's the myth: if I love my child too much, they will think I approve of their behavior. I've heard this from parents, and some of you guys are chuckling right now because I think you may have felt that. I just don't believe this. I just believe that it's false. As a Christian, you are called to love, plain and simple. And we can talk about those 6 verses in the Bible, but holy smokes, let's do a study on how we are called to love each other, and specifically Jesus' words about loving our enemies. So even if worst case scenario, you are on that violently non-affirming side, and that your child has become your enemy or their partner is your enemy, even then, your calling as a follower of Christ is to extend love, extend grace, and to extend understanding. So lavishly loving your child, I don't think equals validating your child's decisions or behavior. My mom loves me. She has met Brett. She loves Brett. And I am old enough and smart enough to realize, hey, Brett, just because mom is like cool with us doesn't necessarily mean she's totally on board in endorsing this relationship. And I've made peace with that. So I think that's important. So I want to do a very quick, what I call an 8-point gut check. Okay, so 8 points is intimidating, but we're going to move fast. But gut check meaning, how are you doing with sort of these 3 principles, and how do they play out in a practical, everyday sense? And I've tried to kind of go through my thoughts, go through my emails, and kind of gather some best practices on how to get yourself in a gut kind of place where you are living in that zone of grace, understanding, and trust. So gut check number 1, preserve influence at all costs. And this is a very, very Andy Stanley-esque principle, so don't think I kind of cooked this up on my own, but influence equals your child valuing your thoughts and opinions. Your child listening to and valuing your thoughts and opinions. That's the thing that I'm challenging you to preserve and protect. I had a dinner last week. Brett and I went out with a fantastic lesbian married couple. Unbelievably fantastic human beings. We had so much fun. And they were telling their story of meeting, and one of the girls was Jewish. One of the ladies grew up in a very conservative Christian family who was not anywhere close to affirming. And she asked them, said, did you invite them to your wedding? And she said, yeah. She said, but they sat on the back row with kind of a frown on their face. They were not happy. They did not smile. They did not engage. They came, they showed up, and they left. And this girl was so wounded by that. It was so sad to hear about that. And so I just started thinking, I'm like, man, in that moment, those parents forfeited that influence they could have, right? I mean, if your child is 20 and you're 45 right now, hypothetically speaking, let's say you live to be 90 years old. That means you have 45 years to influence your child. Wow, that's fantastic. Don't sacrifice those 45 years for that 2 to 3 years early on where things are hard and rough and we say things we regret. Preserve influence at all costs. Influence is lost in arguments and shouting and assumptions, in not listening, in hyper emotion and lack of empathy. Another way influence is lost is social media. And this can be sort of passive or purposeful, right? Having strong opinions on this issue in a public square is going to hurt your child if you're on the non-affirming side, right? I've talked to people who've been hurt by their parents' silence. When the Pulse shooting happened, I promise you, LGBT kids were watching kind of how their parents navigated that. And that's not to say we always have to make a show, but at times it would be really meaningful for your child to do that. So parents are quick. Me and my mom got in this argument once. This is funny, but she quoted Ephesians 6:1, which says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Parents love that verse, I bet. So I was quick to say, because I've studied the Bible, 3 verses down, Paul says, fathers, probably mothers too, do not exasperate your children. Don't exasperate them. And then in Colossians 3, he says, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. This is sort of 2 sides of the same thing, right? This is that grace, understanding, trust, peace. Kids, you are absolutely called to honor your parents in every way possible. Parents, you are called, do not embitter your children. Do not do things that put a burden on them to push them away from your family or push them away from the faith. So play the long game. Preserve influence with your child so they will value your words for years to come. Number 2, this is a fun one. Completely stop caring what your friends think. Not many people want to admit this, but I have heard it. Boy, all of us care what our friends think. And if you're a parent, no matter your age, you still care what your friends think. And I guarantee, some of you had this very intense conversation early on in your mind about what is so-and-so going to think and what is she going to think? And it's this kind of giant, kind of tangled web. But at the end of the day, just stop caring. I think this is an acquired skill. I think our churches are incredibly toxic in that we're comparing each other and, what do we drive and what do we wear and that kind of thing. We're comparing children and their accomplishments. But this is just a reminder, you owe your friends nothing on this topic. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't have to defend your behavior to them. As you proceed in this situation is between you, God, and your kid. And it doesn't matter what Janice, in the other Sunday school class says or thinks. It just does not matter. And so I think this is an incredible gift to your child. If you can acquire the skill of not caring what your friends think, it is an incredible gift because that takes a lot of pressure off of your shoulders as a parent to know that, hey, I'm just in this to honor God and to honor and support my child, and nobody else really has a dog in this race. So practice it, rehearse it, talk about it. Just don't care. Point number 3, embark on a journey of radical understanding and empathy. A journey. Journeys are long. Journeys don't happen in one conversation. Journeys have ups and they have downs. Journeys may last an entire lifetime. I think a lot of parents are fearful of this journey because I think you're scared of what you might hear. I think another thing, not a lot of people want to admit, parents sometimes feel like maybe I'm responsible for how my child is. And of course, hopefully that's not true in any capacity. There's no faults or not even fault, but there's no reason that may have come from you. This journey at times is very practical. It may be reading books that your child suggests, a blog. Maybe it's you making more gay friends. Maybe it's you going to Atlanta Pride, which is in October, and just kind of checking it out and watching and seeing what's there. From episode 29, Lifeboats, quote, if they feel like talking, ask them what it was like out on those seas. Ask them about the storms. Ask about the wind and the rain. Ask if they were scared. Ask them if God was there. So I wrote that just to say, ask them questions. I can't tell you how much of a longing I had for just my mom to just ask me what it was like going through this journey alone, childhood, high school, college, professional. I just wanted her to ask. No matter your child's age, I would say there's probably a pretty good chance that your child wants you to ask what that journey was like, free of opinions and theology and lectures, but just the human journey of what that was like. 2 things I've heard from LGBT kids. Number 1, they often feel wounded, which is a no-brainer. They may feel wounded by religious people, family members, or the culture. About 3 months ago, I was bitten by a dog. First time I've been bitten by a dog. I was walking out my back gate of my place where I live, and this lady with a little white fuzzy dog with a sweater on, that dog, we pass, and it just jumps up and bang, gets me right there. And I look down, and there's blood, and I look up at her, and she's just walking away. I said, lady, your dog just bit me. Oh, I had no idea. I thought he just kind of yipped. And I said, I'm bleeding, My roommate's a doctor, so we had this long, do we go to the hospital, do I have rabies, the whole thing. I was fine. A little over dramatic. But here's the point. I now have acquired a great fear of ladies with dogs. I am not kidding you. I go for runs. It is instinctual in me. When I see a lady coming at me with a dog, you will not believe how far I'll veer off that path to get away from that dog because I have lost all trust in dogs, specifically ladies with dogs. Because it happened once, and I assume till the day I die, I will veer out of the way of ladies with dogs. Here's the reality. Your kid has been dog bit. Very, very possibly has been dog bit by a lady, God, with a dog, the church, or religious people. And some of them have been dog bit not just once, they have been dog bit time and time and time and time again. And so when you see your child lashing out or saying something crazy or rude or angry, know that a lot of times, as you know, that is a reaction out of the things they've experienced. I mean, I have very, very vivid memories. I have a friend who said, quote, gays are the scourge of the earth. I remember where I was standing when he said it. Another friend, I wrote about this one, gays are the closest thing we have to aliens. What does that even mean? Another friend whose just parents said gays are an abomination, period, end of story. And so, I remember hearing stories of HIV and being told the church that that's God's punishment. I remember watching, this was only maybe a year ago, ISIS, kill gay people. And every time an LGBT person sees something like that, that's a little dog bite. And so a lot of us have a limp and we have kind of this trained reaction that all of us need healing from. And if you're in this room and you've got that, I would challenge you to get some good counseling and try to begin to heal from that. The second thing beyond the wounding is your child may feel completely misunderstood. Have you ever felt misunderstood? It's the worst feeling. I mean, imagine if I, as a single man, imagine your child was younger, and I, as a single man, were to begin lecturing you on how to raise your child. Some of you have experienced this, right? Single people giving advice to married people about children. And it's infuriating, right? Well, you need to let him cry it out. I don't think you know what you're doing. And your kid watches TV too much, and you're going to let him eat that? That's too much sugar, right? I mean, can you imagine the audacity of how that would feel if some ignorant person were giving you that lecture? This is kind of the lived experience of gay people, right? 97% of the human population, as far as we know, is kind of mostly straight. And yet everybody has an opinion on how the gay experience should be, what our rights should be, whether we're going to hell, whether we can't get in, whether we can serve in the church or we can't. And so this just creates, as much as we try to explain ourselves, it creates this deep sense of being misunderstood. And so again, the wounding thing and the misunderstanding thing are big, big pieces I want you guys to grasp onto, because I think that can be uncovered kind of in a lot of conversation. So are you on a journey of deeply understanding your child's feelings? What would it look like to acknowledge your child's pain? What would it look like to ask for their forgiveness? That feels really tough, but boy, that could be a really beautiful thing. Your child has likely been the victim of some kind of injustice on some level. They need to see you recognize and empathize with that. I will never forget the conversation with my really good friend, Ann. She was one of my close friends I'd come out to in my kind of late 20s. And that was my first conversation to kind of tell her this journey I'd been on, And I'm talking. And she finally just stops me and says, Brett, everything you just told me, that's not okay, right? It's not okay that you had to go through this and that these people said these things. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it felt like for somebody to look at me and say, that was crap. You should not have had to go through that. And I cannot tell you how healing that was for me, for a close friend to just say, that wasn't okay. And the whole world may not acknowledge that, but you've got one person sitting across the table that acknowledges that that was not okay. And I love you and I'm for you. And since then, I've had so many people jump into that same conversation in my life, and it has been so healing. And so just hearing that wasn't okay is a really, really beautiful and amazing thing. Number 4, establish a communication cadence. No show of hands, but I bet some of you have a hard time talking about this issue. Boy, my mom and I have had a really, really tough time. Most parents don't know how to bring it up. I mean, there's just no easy segue into Johnny, let's talk about the gay thing. Let's talk about your homosexuality. There's just no clean, transition into that. And so it is in these conversations, often it's like Family Feud and that big red button and the two people. And sometimes these conversations start, and it's as if when you hit the button, instead of the thing flipping over, the whole room blows up and we all die. And it's the conversation gets going, and within the first, sometimes 5 minutes, somebody hits that red button. We say something we wish we could take back in a moment of anger, and everything kind of goes to pot. So 2 pitfalls on the communication piece. There's one side of error or the other. One of them is we never talk about it. I think that's incredibly not healthy to never be talked about, because that may communicate to your child that, mom and dad think this is a really big deal. It's not even safe to talk about. The other flip side is we talk about it all the time, and Johnny is just utterly bedraggled at how constantly mom and dad are thinking about this and talking about this. And I think that's not great too. So I think it's really important to establish some kind of communication cadence. I think this starts with, again, just asking, hello, Johnny, how often do you want to talk about this? I feel like we need to talk about it. I feel like it's an important conversation. Is it okay? How often, do we need to make that happen? 2 quick strategies I've seen employed here to reduce the awkwardness, because it's just there. Number 1 is give these conversations a name. What if you just called this conversation a family forum? And now that you've branded it and given it a name, you can say, hey, I know you're coming home for college in a month. Can we have a family forum then? Okay, cool. Right? That's a lot easier than saying, let's talk about the gay thing. Maybe it's, a family forum, a family convention, whatever you want to call it. The second idea is to pick a place where these conversations happen. Maybe it's a particular ice cream shop. And child just knows, hey, whenever mom and Johnny go there, this is the conversation we have, and say, hey, let's go get ice cream. And that can be kind of a way to signal that as well. Number 5, sow grace deeply into your conversations. Sow grace deeply into your conversations. Words, how we speak about this topic is so important. The best person in my life who gets this is probably the most conservative and traditional Christian man that I know. My mentor from college, his name is Olin. I cannot tell you the amount of grace this man has shown me. In our early conversations, I came out to him a decade ago. And whenever we would talk about this, he would just sow into his conversation and say things like, boy, Brett, I don't understand how this works, and I don't understand what this feels like to you. Help me understand what you meant when you said that, right? Oh, Brett, gosh, I'm going to say something, and I hope it's not offensive. If it is offensive, please, please forgive me as your brother in Christ. And boy, you want to talk about refreshing. It was so nice to have somebody who just kind of understood this is a heavy conversation. We're not throwing words around like hand grenades or confetti, right? Like he was aware that he wanted to honor me kind of in that moment. And so the phrase, help me understand, forgive me in advance are two great phrases that everybody in this room can adopt in your next conversation. Ask your child if you're saying offensive things. I hate the word homosexual. Like my mom, she was like, the homosexual community. I was like, I don't like that word. But some of you might not. Everybody's different, and your child has different preferences. So just ask, and that takes courage. And I know that's kind of tough. Number 6, center Jesus and center grace. This is crucial to helping your child kind of hang on to their faith. Many of your children are wounded by the church, wounded by religious people. They've had Scripture weaponized and used against them to create a sense of shame and a sense of exclusion. But here's the thing, because I've been down this road myself of looking at Scripture and, not understanding and feeling different emotions and anger. But here's the deal. Jesus. Boy, Jesus is I think he would just be a friend of the gays if he were among us today. I mean, that guy just gravitated towards people on the margins, the tax collectors and all these different people, and he hung out with them. He was deeply embedded in their lives. And so I'm not saying you've got to go, find a fully affirming church that has the rainbow flag, but be at a place where Jesus and the concept of grace are firmly centered at the center of your theology. And so it's not about mitigating the rest of Scripture, but in the history of the world, no one has been led astray who has been pointed to Jesus. No one has been led astray who's been pointed to Jesus. They may have chosen to go another direction, but you can never go wrong with centering Jesus at the middle of that conversation. Number 7, celebrate all the other wonderful things about your child. Guys, this gay thing is hard and it can be tough and a lot of tension. But boy, I bet your child wants you to know there is so much more to them than that. You know what those things are. Their hobbies, their career choices, their schooling, their friend group, whatever it may be. Man, find every excuse to just celebrate your child and all those other things. Create a culture of celebration within your family and within your relationship. It's been said a million times. Relationships are about credits and debits, right? When we credit a relationship, we're investing, we're celebrating, we're rejoicing, we're high-fiving. And then sometimes we have to debit, meaning that's a hard conversation, conflict, resolution, all those kinds of things. And so I'm just a big believer in saturate, your family kind of culture with just a sense of celebration and positivity. So, when that conversation comes, it's tough and you have to make a withdrawal. You've got some credits there to make that point. Last little point on this, initiate conversation with your child. This is not an LGBT thing. As I'm watching my millennial friends get older, I'm sensing that the conversation, it feels like the parent always expects the child to call. And maybe that's not right, but that's what I hear from my friends. And so just remember to initiate conversation. Again, just check-ins and hellos and that kind of thing to keep it rocking. And then finally, number 8, love your kids' person. Love your kids' person. I'm talking about their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their partner, or a spouse. This is a really, really big deal. I can remember in my early days of my relationship with Brett, for the first time in my life, I've got someone that I care so deeply about. And they're such a person of character and such a person of just amazingness. And I can remember at this time, neither one of us, or I was kind of semi-out and he was, and we weren't really able to be kind of public with our relationship. And I can remember having that thought of I cannot imagine bringing this treasured human being around other people and him being disrespected or looked down upon or looked at as lesser. I mean, that was the most, felt like a potential wounding that could come. And so, when you're gay, you want to kind of show that person off like every other, human in the world. And so just feel free to ask your kids about their partner and how's it going, what's the relationship like. My mom does that, and it feels so good just for her to ask, hey, how's Brett? What's he been up to lately? It means a whole lot. So again, I think sometimes Christian parents are scared to love that person because that'll communicate sort of a approval or a validation. But I think, Johnny's going to be in that relationship either way. It does no good to alienate either one of those parties. So if you want to gain some points with your kid, love their person more than they love them. And I promise that will mean a whole lot. So, guys, grace, understanding, and truth. This is the model I'm trying to get into in the moments where I have tension with my mom, is to remember that, Brett, you have received so much grace and you are called to give it back. Brett, you need to understand where she's at and what story she's believing. And you need to trust that this is all going to work out, that God's got this thing, he's got you, he's got mom, and that you're all going to be okay. I'm so optimistic. Guys, I'm having so many conversations these days with kids like yours, and they're emailing me, and things are changing in a positive way, and they're more optimistic and more hopeful, and parents are learning this nuanced skill of how to navigate this well, and they're telling me fantastic stories about that. I feel like the word that's been kind of ringing in my ears the last few weeks is the word diaspora, which is a very kind of fancy word. But in the Old Testament, the Israelites are cast, I think they're taken captive into Babylon. They're removed from their homeland, and they're sort of wandering with no home, no vision, no leadership. And this was the diaspora, the scattering of the Jewish people. And this is kind of what I feel like the LGBT thing has been. I feel like for the last 100 years, last 1,000 years, last whatever you want to call it, there's been just a scattering of LGBT people of faith. And what I'm sensing is that God is kind of calling those folks home, calling them home. And he's going to start giving them encouragement and vision. He's going to start giving them mentors, people they can look to. And these conversations are going to start moving a lot cleaner. My last little story, and I'm done. Most of you hopefully know the origin of the name Blue Babies Pink. I read a news article about 8 years ago about a doctor in Memphis named Sheldon Carones was his name. Probably like 80, 85 years old at the time this article was written. He had been a lifetime neonatal doctor in the city of Memphis. If you don't know, the city of Memphis at that time had the highest infant mortality rate in the whole country, on par with some third world nations. More infant mortality is any child that dies before the age of 1. And so Sheldon Carones had basically made it his mission to kind of eradicate this problem in Memphis, to basically revive these babies and to nurse them on to health. And so he started this whole big center, and there was all this funding, and he was kind of the fundraiser, and he staffed a big team. And over time, the infant mortality rate went drastically down in the city of Memphis. And in this article I read, the journalist asked him, she says, Dr. Carones, what do you hope to be remembered for? And his answer was, turning blue babies pink, which is this incredible visual of tiny infants being nursed back to life. And for me, that was the journey I felt, and I felt so blue and dead and hopeless and sad, and I feel so pink and I feel so alive. And my hope and wish is that you will experience great levels of pink in your home, in your heart, and in the heart of your child. Thank you guys so much. Guys, I have had a blast. I've had such a good time rewatching some of these interviews, talking about new thoughts and ideas, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Guys, our live workshop is done, but I want you to hang on for just a couple more minutes for a couple of really important updates. First question I have for you is, did you notice a few kind of recurring themes in some of these videos? I certainly did, and we did not coach anyone on what to say or how to approach these questions, but I thought it was really cool that there were some recurring themes that kind of kept coming up, and I think those are things that we really need to pay attention to. Guys, the good news is this is just the beginning. The live workshop is just the kickoff to Harbor. There's a lot more to come, a lot more planned. My goal in this group is to underpromise and overdeliver on your expectations. I tried, even in crafting sort of what you're getting with Harbor, to undersell it a little bit, because I want you to be surprised at the amount of value that you get out of this group, out of the resources, and out of the content as well. So, and the good thing about our community group is we're going to be able to take some of these videos and kind of talk about them. And if you did receive or have questions, thoughts about the videos, I would love to hear from you. Love to hear what those questions and thoughts were. You can always email us, harborparents@gmail.com. That's our main way to get in touch with us. So a few other thoughts. Number one, I want us to be people of action. One of the big flaws of online training, online courses, is that it's easy to just become sort of a passive consumer and nod our heads and think that that was a good thought. But part of my job in this group is to just sort of gently nudge everyone here to take action on what we're learning, to begin to implement some of these strategies. And so that's the good thing about this group, is that we now have a system in place. You have a community support group in place to help sort of integrate some of these thoughts into how we think, act, and how we speak. So that's exciting. A few other things. Throughout the workshop tonight, you heard us mention other organizations. Susan Cottrell, Amy Blakeslee, the McDonalds. And I was very clear with them. Guys, Harbor is for your groups. We want to promote your groups, promote what you're doing as much as possible. There is zero sense of competition. I would love for you guys to look into those resources. There's other groups out there. Feel free to jump into those. Again, I want Harbor to connect you to the best resource for you. And hopefully this is just the springboard to get you involved in some of those other really great things. One more thing. This is a guilt-free group. I'm really big on this because when you sign up for something, especially when it relates to content, there's the fear that, is it going to be a lot of work? Is it going to be one more thing? Am I going to have to have homework? The answer is no. I am prohibiting you from allowing anything in Harbor to cause you a sense of stress or guilt. We all have enough of that in our lives. And so watch the videos, go back and rewatch them, go at your own pace, speak up in the Harbor community group, make friends, reach out, ask for help. But if you don't want to do that, if you're more of a quiet person, or maybe you just want to stay more confidential and quiet, that's a-okay. There's no reason to feel pressure to be any certain way. You be you. Know that you are loved, and we want to engage with you and offer you resources and content as much or as little as you want. I do want to ask you, though, to engage in the Harbor community group here on Facebook. Listen, I'm not going to be in the group every day offering profound thoughts. The last thing I want to do is set myself up as the person with all the answers. I am on this journey with you, listening, learning, and then relaying things that I'm learning, connecting you to other people who have thoughts. The star of the group is you. The star of the group, and the key to make this work is the community. Listen, you guys are brilliant. You have incredible thoughts. You've walked down roads that others have not. And so I would encourage you to reach out to each other, send a private message, form your own group if that's what it takes. But be there for each other and offer as much support and help as you possibly can. Don't forget about the issue of confidentiality. I've addressed this a couple times. Guys, what is said in the Harbor group stays in the Harbor group. We've got some people in the group who have kids that are still in the closet, some parents who are kind of in the closet as well. And so I'm going to be very, very strict on this in that everyone is required to keep what's said there, keep it there. And don't talk about the members of the group or the posts in the group because we want to maintain that sense of privacy and confidentiality. If you have any problems or questions, again, email us at harborparents@gmail.com. We will do the best we can to address those for you. Look for my emails. If you get an email from me from here on out, it's going to have intentional content behind it. It's not just going to be a promotional thing. So I really challenge you to and ask you to read those emails and check that out. That's it. Guys, I love you. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for trusting me in this, for our team. A huge thanks to Austin, Brett, and Ashley, our Harbor production team for the night. Huge thank you to all of our talent, Susan, the McDonalds, the Blakesleys, my mom, and others who contributed to tonight's workshop. Couldn't have done it without you. Hey, we love you. We're for you. We're in your corner. And the good news is we're just getting started. Harbor parents, have a great night.